morning, everybody. I warmly welcome you all to our annual CME on the occasion of a Jaslok Foundation Day. Last 1 year, we all spent worrying about and fighting COVID. Let's look forward to the brighter stripes and brighter days. We are back with some very interesting talks and more interesting debates. I'm very happy to say this year we have got a tremendous response to our annual day CME. We have more than 2,800 registrations. So we're very happy and proud. Let me take this opportunity to introduce my co-convener, Dr. Paresh Doshi. He is a director of the neurosurgery at Jaslok Hospital, and he's a pioneer in the stereotactic and functional neurosurgery in India. He's pretty stickler for the perfection, and I'm sure I'll have to watch all my steps. He must be observing me very keenly. I can see that. And at the beginning, let's start the webinar. I invite our young and dynamic CEO, Mr. Jitendra Harian, to give us the welcome address. Mr. Harian, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Desai. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. This month marks the completion of a journey that began 48 years ago, the personification of labor of love and vision of a visionary, way ahead of his times, our founder, Mr. Lokomal Chandrai. On this momentous occasion to commemorate the completion of yet another milestone, I welcome you all. Our founder's vision 48 years ago to build a world-class institution has stood the test of time and continues to grow. What we see today is a culmination of the tireless and persistent efforts of one and all over the years together. I'm extremely proud of and would like to thank for the commitment, hard work, and resourcefulness shown by our doctors and employees of Jaslok family, who have all chipped in their fair share to make this possible. A lot has been done, yet much remains to be done as we strive to achieve our vision of to be the hospital of choice for patients, physicians, and employees by providing state-of-the-art medical care with compassion and dignity. Our trustee and chairperson, Mrs. Kanta Masant, couldn't attend this function today due to some emergency. However, she has also sent her welcome note for all of us. I am now reading this. My dear Jaslok family, I, with rest of the Board of Trustees and management, warmly welcome you to the 48th Foundation Day celebration CME. As you all know, last more than a year has been testing times for all of us. I'm very proud and happy that Jaslok Hospital has done incredible service to humanity during this time and kept Jaslok flag flying. I thank each one of you for this monumental achievement. I assure you we will support every good activity fully, as has been the Jaslok culture. I wish best luck to this webinar and hope all will enjoy thoroughly. Thank you. On this optimistic note, I would like to throw the CME open now for interesting and engaging discussions lined up. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Desai.
It's Paresh now.
Thank you, Mr. Harian, for a very nice and apt welcome address, and our thanks to the trustees of the Jaslok Hospital for giving us such a beautiful institute to work there. We'll be starting off the CME, and before we start, I would like to invite the chairpersons for the keynote address, which is going to be delivered by Dr. Sarosh Katrak. The chairpersons are Dr. Sunil Pandya. Professor Sunil Pandya has been a teacher, a leader, and a visionary in the time in the field of neurosurgery. He retired as the head of the department from KEM Hospital and joined Jaslok Hospital. I remember, sir, on various occasions, the way he gave the freedom for us to conduct the department, though he was a senior most person in the department, he gave us the full freedom to develop the department in the way we would like to. He showed us the light and way to keep our practices ethical and moral. And Dr. Sunil Pandya will always be remembered in our neurosurgical fraternity as a historian because of his work to chronicle the histories of neurosurgery of India. The second chairperson is my dear friend, Dr. Srinivas Desai. I thank Dr. Desai to bring me on to this platform to be a co-convener with him. Thanks, Dr. Desai. Dr. Desai is a director of interventional radiology, and he is also a leader in the field of radiology. No one needs an introduction for him. He has several qualities. One of the qualities is about leadership. The second quality which I admire, envy, and be proud of is his ability to gel with 80-year-old and 18-year-old. He is a person who has not changed his age since 20 years that I have been in Jaslok. The first day I still remember when I came to Jaslok as a young person, he told me that, Paresh, you are welcome in this department and you are a part of our fraternity. So I welcome Dr. Srinivas Desai, and I hand over the chair now to them to introduce Dr. Katra. Thank you.
I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Srinivas, and to Paresh for having invited me to participate in this very interesting meeting. And although Sarosh needs really no introduction, but it is customary in all such functions that there should be a formal introduction. I think that is intended essentially for the younger members of the audience who may not be aware of all the achievements of the speaker. And so we have Dr. Srinivas Desai, who will now introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Sarosh Katra. Over to Srinivas.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. As Dr. Pandya very rightly said, that today's keynote address speaker, Dr. Sarosh Katra, does not need any introduction whatsoever, but it is customary to introduce, especially in the interest of the younger generation. So Dr. Katra is the director of the neurology, and now he retired from Jaslok. I call him Sarosh. He's my very dear friend. And you can see a very handsome Sarosh, then and even now. He did his undergraduate and postgraduate and super specialty education from Grand Medical College and JJ Group of Hospitals, Mumbai. From September 2005, he was appointed as a Professor Emeritus for Life at Department of Neurology at Grand Medical College and Sir JJ Group of Hospitals. He is an Emeritus Director, Department of Neurology at Jaslok Hospital since July 2019. Over 48 years of teaching experience. He has been the member of the Education Committee of the WFN, that is World Federation of Neurology, was the co-chair of the teaching courses of WCN from 2014 to 2017. From 2005 to 2020, he was the national coordinator for India of the WFN sponsored Continuum CME program, in which I also have given some lectures, and brought India to the top of all the countries utilizing this program. For this and his commitment to the neurological education, he was awarded the very prestigious Ted Munsat Award for Neurology Education by WFN in October 2019. And these are some beautiful pictures of when he got that award, of the Munsat Award. He has delivered 19 orations, both in India and abroad. The most prestigious one was the Richard Maslin lecture delivered at the plenary session of the WCN in Vienna on 26 September 2013. He is the only Indian neurologist to be given this honor. We are very proud of you, Sarosh. Very, very proud of you. And these are the beautiful memories of that lecture. Has 30 publications in peer-reviewed Indian and international journals. Prestigious ones like Lancet, Brain. That's very, very difficult to get the publication. The Brain is very superb journal, and Journal of Neurological Sciences. He was the president of Indian Academy of Neurology in 2004 and 2005. Has special interest in CNS infections, particularly tuberculosis and HIV, and peripheral neuropathies. And he has many hobbies, and mainly photography and calligraphy. Very varied personality. And we have been seeing lots of his photography, especially on his. Before I end his introduction, this is what I found, and it is so apt for Sarosh. They who plant an avenue of trees cannot, in the nature of things, hope to enjoy them in their maturity and grandeur. They plant for generations unborn. Much that we have a price today comes to us from our fathers. They did not build or make to last their time. And this is what a great teacher always does and keeps on giving to the students. And this aptly fits our today's keynote address speaker, Dr. Sarosh Katrak. I hand over now and invite Dr. Katrak to deliver his keynote address.
Thank you, Srinivas, for this very kind introduction. The AIDS epidemic officially began on the 5th of June, 1981, because on that day, M.S. Gottlieb and his colleagues from CDC Atlanta published the first report of AIDS in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report in 1981. They reported pneumocystis pneumonia amongst gays, and initially it was called GRID, which stood for Gay-Related Immunodeficiency Syndrome. Later, it became AIDS. 2 years later, Professor Luc Montagnier and his colleagues from Pasteur Institute in Paris discovered the lymphadenopathy associated virus, which was the same as HIV-1. 1 year later, Robert Gallo from NIH in US reported on the HTLV3 virus, and he claimed that it was the same as HIV-1 and that he was the discoverer of HIV-1. This led to a sort of bitter ego clash between the two researchers. And in March 1987, President Ronald Reagan of the US and the French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac both declared them both as the co-discoverers of HIV, putting an end to that controversy. Now, Guitan Dugas was a French-Canadian air steward, and he used to travel frequently between France and Canada. He entered the Toronto gay scene in 1971-72, and it is believed that he had 250 partners per year over the next decade. In 1979, he developed lymphadenopathy. In 1980, he developed Kaposi sarcoma and full-blown AIDS by 1981. He died in March 1984 and was the first person to introduce HIV in the US from very likely France, where he had a partner from Algeria. Posthumously, he was called Patient O, but this was mistakenly taken as 0 in a cluster study. The AIDS epidemic began in India in the mid-80s. In 1986, 12 commercial sex workers tested positive in Madras. And the UN AIDS report of 2004 showed that AIDS was exponentially increasing all over the world. In Tamil Nadu at that stage, which had the highest prevalence of HIV and AIDS, 50% of the commercial sex workers were positive. And between 2000 and 2003, the IV drug users increased from 26% positive to nearly 64% positive. I saw my first patient in mid-1991. This patient had chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy in the facioscapulohumeral distribution. By early 1992, he developed cardiomyopathy, followed by a cardioembolic right hemiplegia, pulmonary tuberculosis, and constant diarrhea. He had severe weight loss and looked practically cachectic, as you can see from his photograph. And this was very similar to SLIMS, about which I will let you know further in my talk. Between March 92 and August 2001, over a period of 9.5 years, I collected nearly 300 cases of neurological complications of HIV and AIDS. And as you can see, the bulk of the patients were opportunistic infections in India. This resulted in two major publications, which I published in the Journal of Neurological Sciences, where I compared the TB meningitis of old, that is without HIV, with the new TB meningitis with HIV. And I wrote a chapter on the neurological manifestations of AIDS in Dr. Wadia's textbook of neurological practice. During this period, as I was reading about HIV and AIDS, the more I read, the more I realized that the origin of HIV and AIDS was shrouded in controversy. And this controversy still persists till today, 2021. And therefore, the title of my talk is The Origin of HIV and AIDS, an Enigma of Evolution. Now, when a statement or a version is oft repeated, it gets accepted as a fact, but in reality, it may be a myth. An example is that HIV came from the African green monkey. The fact is that HIV did come from Africa, but the myth is that it came from the African green monkey. Now, any theory about AIDS will have to account for the pre-epidemic cases of HIV and AIDS. Now, in the mid-1950s and 60s, American and Belgian doctors were collecting blood from Central Africa to study the genetic makeup of the various tribes. And these samples were collected and kept. After the AIDS epidemic, all these blood samples that were collected from Congo were tested, and one turned out to be positive. This sample ZR59 was collected from an unidentified African male in the area around Leopoldville in 1959. Now, Leopoldville now is known as Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The second and interesting case is that of David Carr, the Manchester sailor. Now, he had joined the Royal Navy and had visited various ports in Africa. In 1958, he developed a mysterious illness which had all the characteristics of immunodeficiency, namely pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, as well as cytomegalovirus infections in various parts of his body. This illness rapidly progressed and he died in 1959. An autopsy was performed and his case was reported by Doctors Williams, Trenton, and Leonard, who was the pathologist. Sorry, excuse me. Leonard and Stanton had preserved 50 tissue samples from David Carr. And in 1980, 30 years later, when they examined them for HIV, all of those tissue samples tested positive for HIV, making David Carr one of the earliest known cases of AIDS. Now, there are 6 theories for the origin of HIV and AIDS. I will dispose of the first 2 very briefly. Heavenly theory states that an angry God brought HIV onto homosexuals, IV drug abusers, and promiscuity, or that the HIV came on the tail as a debris, cosmic debris, on the tail of a comet. I think these are not to be taken seriously. The conspiracy theory, as is now evident even in COVID-19, stated at that stage The Americans blamed the Soviet bloc, and the Soviets blamed the American for germ warfare and bringing the HIV into the world. Now, I will talk about the other 4 theories, and I will spend a little time on the contaminated oral polio vaccine theory, which is the most controversial and also the most thought-provoking. The lead player in this theory was Edward Hooper, who was a former BBC correspondent who lived in Africa between 1981 and 1986 as a backpacker, student, teacher, storekeeper. In August 1986, when he was in Kampala, he heard that people were dying in a village called Kasansero, which was on the western shores of Lake Victoria, of a mysterious illness which experts believed could be AIDS. So he trekked to that village and he met up with the elders, and he found out that those victims would have cough, fever, ulcers in the mouth, sores, and constant diarrhea. One common factor was that they became very thin, emaciated, and shrunken, and in the local language they called it slims, and that is very reminiscent of my first patient whom I saw in 1991. In his book, he mentions that I still look back on that day with a mixture of sadness and horror. And this is the map of around Lake Victoria, and the arrow points to the village of Kasensero, which you can see is along the border between Uganda and Tanzania. And the elders mention that this disease was brought by Tanzanian soldiers, by traders, and women who came to sell their bodies. Now, things were simultaneously happening in the world, and I changed the scenario now to the US, where there was a WABC radio program called Natural Living with Gary Null, in which far out ideas were propagated. On 31st of May 1987, Eva Lee Sneed, a San Antonio physician, said that the oral polio vaccine was contaminated with SIV from an African green monkey. Listening to this program was a reclusive New Yorker called Louis Pascal. Louis Pascal started reading more about this and got convinced that it was not the green monkey, but it was the chimp kidneys which were contaminated with SIV40, as it was known later on. This oral polio vaccine was developed by Hilary Koprowski, who was the head of the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia. From his reading and research, Louis Pascal also established a link between the vaccination sites and the early AIDS cases. And he drafted a scientific paper which he sent to various journals, including Lancet, Nature, and New Scientist, but all he got from the scientific community was rejection or silence. After 5 frustrating years, he was able to publish this article in a remote journal published by the University of Wollongong in New South Wales. And the title is interesting: What Happens When Science Goes Bad? The Corruption of Science and the Origin of AIDS, a Study in Spontaneous Generation. Now, in order to understand the further sequence of events, it becomes important for you all to understand the genesis of the oral polio vaccine. In August 1921, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States, was stricken with polio, which was called infantile paralysis at that stage. This started his courageous effort to eradicate polio, and he formed the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis, which was headed by his friend Mr. Basil O'Connell, sorry. Basil O'Connell started the March of Dimes, and it is reported that he collected nearly $25 million per year for nearly 2 decades. And this national foundation funded Jonas Salk for injectable polio vaccine. Unfortunately, in April 1955, 5 children who had received the polio vaccine developed polio in the same limb in which they were injected with the vaccine. This was called the Cutter incidence, and this shifted the whole focus from injectable polio vaccine onto oral polio vaccine, in which the front runners were Hilary Koprowski, Albert Sabin from the University of Cincinnati, and Harold Cox from Lederer Laboratories. On 27/2/1950, Hilary Koprowski was the first scientist to administer oral polio vaccine. Now, in order to get a lead onto the others, he started an experimental laboratory at Lindi near Kisangani in the Belgian Congo. And he used chimpanzee kidneys for the production of his oral polio vaccine, which he called CHAT. And between 1957 and 1960, nearly 300,000 people received the oral polio vaccine CHAT in Central Africa. And this is Hilary Koprowski facing the camera together with Albert Sabin in profile in 1959. This is Kisangani, the red star points out to Kisangani, and on the right you have the Camp Lindi sign together with the pet chimpanzee of that camp known as Jamba. And this is 2 African helpers dismembering a chimp in the laboratory at Camp Lindi, 1957. And you can see that they are doing it under highly hygienic conditions. And this is Agnes Flack, who was vaccinating a sea of Africans with CHAT in the Ruzizi Valley in 1958. Now, Louis Pascal's theory of contaminated oral polio vaccine would have died a silent death were it not for certain events which resuscitated this whole theory. On 12th of March 1992, Tom Curtis, a freelance writer, wrote an article called The Origin of AIDS based on Louis Pascal's theory of contaminated oral polio vaccine in a magazine called Rolling Stones. Now, this received widespread attention via the wire services. Hilary Koprowski was furious at the wildest of lay speculations. And the Vista appointed a panel of virologists and doctors to look into this speculation. And they submitted an 8-page report which exonerated CHAT. Now, interestingly, this report was not published in a scientific journal, but was released to the press in a hotel. Hilary Koprowski subsequently sued Tom Curtis and Rolling Stone magazine for defamation, and the matter was settled out of court with an apology issued by both of them. However, Edward Hooper read this article, Origin of AIDS, and he became convinced about the contaminated oral polio vaccine. And he pursued this theory and became its most ardent supporter. Through his research, he came in contact with Professor William Hamilton, who was an evolutionary biologist at Oxford. He was interested in evolutionary aspects of AIDS. He was intrigued by the contaminated oral polio vaccine and felt that the report of the Vista panel was scientifically weak and premature. But what bothered him the most was the rejection of Louis Pascal by the scientific community. And therefore, he encouraged and guided Edward Hooper to pursue his research. Over the next 7 years, Edward Hooper tenaciously pursued this theory. He self-taught molecular biology, virology, primatology, and other disciplines. And in December 1999, he published this book, which is a 1,700-page book called The River, A Journey to the Source of HIV and AIDS. In this book, he shows compelling circumstantial evidence implicating chat vaccine. He showed that there was a high degree of correspondence between chat vaccination sites and early AIDS cases. And the positive samples before 1981 came from vaccination sites. All these samples, 47 out of the 52 samples which were HIV positive, came from within 100 miles of vaccination sites. Now, in red is the vaccination sites. And as you can see, he documented not only the number of cases, but in the year in which they were documented. As you can see that there were 9 cases as early as 1961. So he did his research in a very detailed fashion. There was vehement rejection from Hilary Koprowski and the Vista Institute. And they were hammer and tongs, went at each other. So much so that William Hamilton, through the Royal Society of London, had to organize a conference on the origin of HIV and AIDS epidemic on the 11th and 12th of September in the year 2000. In this conference, Hooper's theory came under intense scrutiny, but he was unfazed. Amongst the many papers, I would just like to outline the paper by Betty Cobber in the year 2000. Betty Cobber and her team had a scientific laboratory in Los Alamos where they used the computer's Nirvana, which was the most common, most powerful supercomputer. And they dated the origin of HIV-1, which she called Eve HIV-1, to 1931 with a range. Now, please remember that date is important to understand these theories. Edward Hooper was unfazed by all these things and stoutly defended his theories. Now, this is taken from the Washington Post, which had published an article in 2001, and they updated that article on the 26th of January 2015. And they said in that article that tests on the samples of the vaccine in storage for over 40 years have shown no trace of HIV or its primate antecedent SIV. This was in a Vista Institute-sponsored research paper. Edward Hooper stated that the vaccine sample release did not include any from the batches which were prepared for use in Africa. And it is interesting to know that the Vista Institute sent these samples from storage to one of the research virologists in America, and it was delivered in the parking lot of a restaurant on the New Jersey to Philadelphia Turnpike. Interesting how they did research in those days. And Edward Hooper went further to state that the biomedical community is engaged in an organized cover-up because of the enormous implication of the hypothesis that AIDS may be an unintended iatrogenic disease. Now, this paper came out in December 2000. And this is arguing the role of the oral polio vaccine hypothesis vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic as we are facing at present. And see what he has to say. Examination of the quick dismissal of the oral polio vaccine theory opens a space for legitimately challenging the widely held belief that the vaccine contamination question was convincingly resolved. He further goes to state that the further results of lack of a thorough analysis of the evidence backing the oral polio hypothesis has resulted in a missed opportunity to read The River, the book The River, as one of the few detailed accounts of the immense social, political, technological, and interspecies infrastructure constituted by Cold War vaccine production. And we seem to be seeing the same thing at present in the COVID-19 vaccine race. Now, that much can be said about the contaminated oral polio vaccine. Now, let's go to the cut hunter theory. What is zoonosis? Zoonosis is a transfer of a pathogen, be it a virus, be it a bacterial or other pathogens, from animals to human beings. Now, the closest genetic similarity of HIV-1 comes from the chimpanzee simian immunodeficiency virus. And the closest genetic similarities of HIV-2 come from the Sooty Mangabe simian immunodeficiency virus. Now, what is the cut hunter theory? Zoonosis occurs because of bushmeat hunting. These hunters kill these monkeys for their meat. And during the process of killing, either the simian immunodeficiency virus enters their bloodstream through cuts and bruises on their hands or through the bites of these animals. Once the SIV enters their body, it adapts to the hunter's body. And adaptation gives rise to a slightly different genetic makeup. And after nearly 40 years, we are seeing the same thing happening with the COVID-19 virus. Wolf and his colleagues had written a paper in 2004 stating that in Africa, retroviral zoonosis is still occurring. The only trouble with this theory is that the timing of the AIDS epidemic cannot be explained because zoonosis has been occurring for centuries. And this is what is happening. The FA pygmies in the Congo with bow and arrows, and in Sierra Leone, a hunter with a modern shotgun killing these monkeys. Now we go to the contaminated needle theory. And the lead player in that is Preston A. Marks. He was a virologist in a primate research, and he worked extensively on SIV. And he was convinced that retroviral zoonosis has been occurring for centuries. What he could not understand is what kick-started the epidemic of AIDS and the timing of AIDS. Now serendipity plays a chance. On October 1997, he was on a flight from New York to New Orleans, and he was in the middle seat. The passenger in the aisle seat was reading a research article written by one of his colleagues from New York. And that passenger was Professor Ernest Drucker, Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, and he was studying the role of unsterile needles in the upsurge of AIDS in West Africa, Asia, and South America. So they got talking and they propounded the theory of serial passage. If you take patient number 1, she's a lady who has SIV after eating monkey meat. She receives an injection. and her SIV gets into that syringe and needle. If the same syringe and needle is used on patient number 2, this SIV gets transferred. And in the serial passage of transfer from patient 1 to 2, SIV gets genetically modulated. This patient number 2, after weeks or months, may receive another injection with another syringe and needle, which is again used for patient number 3, and it gets modified further. So with this, each serial passage, the benign SIV gets converted into the malignant HIV, and it can be eventually even transmitted via sexual contact. Now, in order to understand this, one must realize that unsterile needles and syringes have been used in Africa for many, many years. Post-World War II, penicillin was introduced as an antibiotic. And by 1950s, WHO and other agencies launched massive health programs in Africa. Poverty and limited resources forced the reuse of syringes and needles. And in 1917 to 1990, it was documented that only 6 syringes were used to vaccinate 90,000 individuals in equatorial French Africa for sleeping sickness. Between 1952 and 1957 UNICEF campaign against yaws, 12 million injections of penicillin were given in Central Africa. But were 12 million syringes and needles used? The answer is an emphatic no. And even today, I think this is a paper from the WHO Bulletin in 2000, between 20 to 60% of health centers in these 4 African countries are still using unsterile syringes and needles. Therefore, Preston Marks said that between 1950 and 1970, unsterile needles exponentially increased the opportunity for serial human passaging of SIV. This serial passaging kick-started the benign SIV into overdrive, and that generated the HIV. He had experimental evidence that SIV becomes 1,000 times more pathogenic by serial passaging through only 3 monkeys. Now, this theory is less flawed than the other 2 theories. But since contaminated injections, were being given from 1970, this theory just could not explain the timing of the epidemic, and the timing had to be established. Which brings us to the last theory, which is the colonialism theory, which is really an offshoot of this theory of contaminated needles. Joseph Conrad had written a novel called The Heart of Darkness about Belgian Congo, life in Belgian Congo, and it was more fact than fiction. The Belgian colonial rule was very harsh and cruel, and more Africans died between 1880 to 1942 than in the preceding 400 years of slavery. In 1920, there was the first census in Belgian Congo, and the census reporters thought that 50% of the population had died in the preceding 2 to 3 decades. And this was exemplified on the cover of Punch magazine in 1906, where it shows a native wrapped by a serpent with the head of King Leopold of Belgium. Now, in the colonies, there was poor diet, poor sanitation, and exhausting labor demands. Well-meaning but ill-equipped doctors tried to protect the workers from smallpox, dysentery, sleeping sickness, and therefore reuse of syringe and unsterile needles was the norm. To appease the laborers, sex workers were officially encouraged, and under these circumstances, transfer of pathogen was inevitable. Now, this is the state of the colonies. You can see the primitive conditions under which vaccination was conducted in the Congo. Now, Jim Moore and two of his postgraduate, postdoctoral students wrote an article, Origin of HIV in Colonial French Equatorial Africa, in the year 2000, and in which he propounded that this was the cause of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. However, he could not explain what Bette Kober had said, that the Eve HIV was dated to 1931, and there was a range between 1950 to 1941. And why did the epidemic come about in the late 70s, early 80s? What he felt, Jim Moore, what he felt was that this delay of decades is an artifact of our perception. There were cases of AIDS, but they were never documented. And therefore, they were never documented, and therefore we have a delay of decades with the documented cases of HIV and AIDS. Therefore, will we ever know how HIV originated? Scientists get attached to pet theories, and then they don't budge from their pet theories. From these four theories, there is one general conclusion, that the origin of HIV was not natural. And 3 out of these 4 theories involve inadvertent, albeit well-intended medical efforts. Lastly, I would like to read to you the foreword which was written by Professor William Hamilton in the book called The River. It so impressed me about the state of the scientific community that I would like to read it out to you. Every time two people put their heads together, truth suffers. When many put their heads together, she suffers more. When the heads are great ones and have owners with much to lose, truth can be made so ill that we should all shiver. And I would add, bow our heads in shame. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Katrak, for that excellent presentation. Sir and Dr. Desai, you would like to make some comment?
Dr. Sunil Pandya, we ask Dr. Pandya to make his observations and comment, please.
Sure. I think we've had a magnificent coverage of a very, very important aspect of this terrible disease, HIV/AIDS, which till COVID took over was the dominant threat for mankind. And I have not heard a similar detailed presentation or read a similar detailed presentation, which is understandable, simple, and yet fully factual. So I think we've been provided a great intellectual treat by Dr. Sarosh Katra. I'd like to make 2 additional points which are not really relevant to his talk, but just to complete the picture. One is the demonstration of the first patient with AIDS in India by Dr. R.D. Lele, who used to be our chief physician at Jaslok, and who was also professor of medicine earlier at the Grand Medical College and JJ Hospital, whilst Dr. Sarosh Katrak was there. And his paper, which was published in 1986, which had Dr. N.H. Wadia, our own chief of neurology at Jaslok, as a co-author, was entitled Transfusion-Associated AIDS and AIDS Dementia. So I think this adds another facet to the story which Dr. Katrak has provided us. And finally, one more point which I feel generates a lot of pride in all Indians, and that is the role of CIPLA in bringing down the cost of HIV/AIDS drugs. And this brought down the mortality in the African countries. And CIPLA had to fight the Americans who were making huge profits. And Hamid of CIPLA, Dr. Yusuf Hamid of CIPLA, fought the battle, won, and was able to provide very relatively inexpensive drugs to treat AIDS in Africa and, of course, in India and the rest of the world. Just two relatively unrelated points to supplement the fund of information which Dr. Katrak has provided. Thank you, Dr. Katrak.
Can I just make one comment? I have published this in the Annals of the Indian Academy of Neurology in the year 2006, volume 9, pages 5 to 10. They do not include the modern references that I referred to, but all the rest of the facts are there. So those who are interested can go back and read about this.
Srinivas, you would like to make a comment or should we proceed?
Okay. I think the talk was so fantastic, so absorbing. I always love to listen to Sorosh's talks because they are always very, very informative and thought-provoking. Thanks, Sorosh, for a fantastic keynote address. You richly deserved this honor and you made full justice to the subject which was given to you. And thank you, Dr. Pandya, sir, for being with us and giving your inputs. Many of you may not know, Dr. Sunil Pandya is the reason why I'm in Jaslok. Nobody knows that. Most of the people have forgotten that. I had told them, Dr. Wadia knew that, and so does the Department of Neurology. Thank you very much, sir, for being here and being with us. Paresh, will you take over this now?
Yeah. So we proceed with the further progress of the symposium. It is my pleasure to introduce our young and dynamic CEO, Mr. Jitendra Harian. He took over the reins of Jaslok Hospital in 2018. He has had an excellent academic records. However, being a CEO demands a totally different set of leadership qualities. Mr. Harian is a leader who has always been cool-headed in any situation. We faced several challenges during the short time that he has been our CEO, and he has come out of each of these Agni Pariksha with flying colors and stronger than ever before. The balanced, human, and just approach that he has taken to wade through each situation is exemplary. A true leader is judged by the respect and love that he receives. I, on behalf of all Jaslokites, am proud to have Mr. Harian as our CEO. On a separate note, Mr. Harian is a fitness buff and he leads to show it by his profile, and he also enjoys and loves singing. It would be incomplete to listen to him without him singing a few lines. I would also request him to sing one verse at the end of his talk. Mr. Harian is going to talk to us on a very important topic, and actually which comes directly from his heart, is keeping head above waters during COVID times. Let's hear from Mr. Harian. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Doshi, for the generous introduction. So let me just share my presentation and then I'll start. Okay, so good morning once again. So firstly, I also want to compliment Dr. Paresh Doshi for such an apt title, keeping your head above water during COVID, which I think best suits the administrators. So I will start my presentation with the lines in the poem by Stevie Smith. Nobody heard him, the dead man, but still he lay mourning. I was much further out than you thought, and not waving but drowning. I think this best describes the administrators in any times, but I think most appropriately in COVID times. So in a nutshell, basically last 1.5 years, as for we as administrators were managing the expectations of various stakeholders and trying to stay afloat. I think this is what we were doing for last 1.5 years, and we're still doing. So let's talk about the stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? So let's talk about the consultants first. I think these are the biggest stakeholders in our hospital. We are a honorary consultancy model. We are a multi-speciality hospital. And obviously when the COVID hit, I think the consultants were equally hit as the hospital was. So in first 6 months, the average occupancy of most of the hospitals in Mumbai was around 30 to 40%. So, I can imagine that, it was very badly, the consultants were affected. In terms of the expectation, obviously the consultants would also expect the safe and friendly protocols, patient-friendly protocols at the same time, and it was really difficult for the administrators and the infection control committee to manage. And sometimes we had friendly debates also on HRCT protocols, RT-PCR protocols, and repetition of RT-PCR protocols, etc., etc. But I must say that I think all our consultants supported us wholeheartedly in last 1.5 years, and thank you very much to all of them. The second biggest stakeholder was the government. What government wanted was, I think, most importantly, the beds and more beds. And more specifically in the second wave of COVID, I think we gave a lot of beds initially, but I think more importantly in the second wave, we gave about 70% of our beds, 75%, and we supported the government. The other aspect from government side was the price control, which still applies as far as the COVID is concerned. The third was the guidelines. I think the frequent changing guidelines was a major challenge. And however, I would say I would compliment the government that, the communication and the coordination was fantastic. It made, the implementation of even the changing guidelines, possible and sort of, smooth. The third stakeholder was obviously the patient, and I would here categorize them into COVID and non-COVID. And you can imagine that I think COVID patient had no choice, no options. In the second phase, especially, there was so much of struggle for the beds. We all know that. Non-COVID patient obviously was like a king. He would want to choose the hospital, where there are less COVID patients, and you would want to go there. So that was again the challenge, for the hospitals to have COVID patients and at the same time, address the non-COVID patients' concerns. Then another biggest stakeholder was obviously staff and residents. They obviously played a big role, in the last 1.5 years, and there obviously the concerns would be their food, their travel, when the infection would happen. The choice of CCC was also a big challenge because sometimes initially, the conditions at the CCC were not so good, and staff would sort of, was not willing to, go to such CCCs, and we had major challenges to, to meet their expectations. But I must say that our unions, our associations, and also the staff per se, they supported, they understood, and they sort of, helped us, cooperated with us. Society, I think society, they had huge expectations from the hospitals, and they were looking up to the hospitals. They during the second phase especially, you can't imagine the kind of, we know, but the kind of calls that we used to get every day from various, known people, unknown people, references, direct or indirect, many. The phone would just keep ringing till probably 11:30, 12 in the night, and they had huge expectations. And we tried to address as much as we can, but I know that we fell short here. Then the media, of course, last but not the least. I think in the first wave, the media was quite nasty. I think they came very heavily on everybody, government, hospitals, everybody. But I think later on they behaved responsible. I think now they're really, writing everything about COVID in a very responsible way. So in all, I think all stakeholders, most importantly, I think there was a good understanding, and everybody chipped in, everybody, helped each other, understood each other, and, for hospitals, as administrators, I think that was very important to seek support from every stakeholder. The other challenge was obviously the infrastructure. Obviously, we did not build the hospitals, so many beds with negative pressure, different entries. So this was one bigger challenge, for us to initially deal with. So we created different entries for clear patients, suspect patients, and COVID patients. Then we converted certain floors into negative pressure or isolation rooms. Then we created screening areas. Then lift management was another problem, additional waiting areas. So a lot of changes we did in the infrastructure. So some of the pictures, so different entries for red entry, orange entry, green entry. Then the 19th floor, which was our OPD, which we had earlier, it was used to be an ICU floor, but we converted that back to 2 years back into OPD floors, but that was reconverted back into ICU with negative pressure. Then the second floor, if you know, it was an open terrace, which we converted into large waiting areas, and also now part of that we're using as vaccination site. Now the big pain point was the internal infection of staff, and how terrible it is to manage. So if one is infected, it doesn't stop with one. I think you have to keep tracing and testing, and it just doesn't end there. So, but I think I'm proud to say that we are in infection control committee laid down very strong and robust protocols, which helped us to contain the infection in a great way in the hospital. Also, we had formed containment committee, which would do the contact tracing in a very scientific way, which also helped the infection to contain. The dilemma, of course, how to deal with the financial, at the same time social responsibility. So typically in the finance, we forecast the future at least 1 year, and probably the reality is 5 to 10% around that. But with COVID, it wasn't like it. We didn't know how to forecast. I mean, when I would check with the experts initially, I think there was a position that COVID would be there for about 4 or 5 months. So July, August, I think 2020, it was expected to be COVID free. Later it became September. I think that then that's experts also stopped talking about it. So it made our job further difficult. But in the initial 6 months, so we were completely haywire, and we were not really knowing how to forecast, because it was so crazy. I mean, there were so many unforeseen expenses that we had to incur. The fixed expenses burden was so much, in spite of having less. You can imagine with 30-40% occupancy, how would you meet the fixed expenses? So it was the biggest challenge. And every now and then there would be a decision-making point, with having social responsibility on one side and the financial feasibility on the other. And most often we had to choose the social responsibility over the financial. We got a few support, some organizations supported us also, but I think most importantly, it came from our trustees. So now the way forward, it's all about the hope. So I'm proud to say that we have so far vaccinated about 80,000 people, and we're still going very strong here. We are soon going to do one mega project with Citibank and BMC together, and we are going to target the areas like Dharavi and all. So this is going to start in about a week's time. These are some glimpses of the vaccination that we did in the community, corporates, and at our side too. Now, this is another thing that we are going to dedicate a dedicated center for COVID with 70 beds, with 36 ICU and 34 O2 beds, and also we're going to have 15-bedded dialysis centers. On the left-hand side, this was the old image of our Jaslok house, what we used to call, and it's going to be called now as Jaslok Annex, which is going to be like this by the end of December. I think we are already 60% work is done, and our ground plus 3 floors are ready to operate. So in the end, I would say that if you all survive this, as I hope we shall, remember that when it came down to it, We didn't fight for land or weapons or house or jewelry. We didn't fight for concert tickets or fancy designations or religions or politics. We didn't fight for shares in a company or seat at the table. We didn't fight for business class tickets or the keys to a house by the beach. When all this is over, remember that we fought for air. So time to fight back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harian, for a very lucid talk, a informative talk, and very hopeful talk, showing the way forward, which is showing a bright future. And thank you very much for Jaslok Annex, which looks so pretty and so inspiring. And it will be obviously, will make Jaslok a COVID and a non-COVID wing, the main Jaslok hospital wing, totally non-COVID. So there will be no dilemma in anyone's mind. And we, on behalf of all the Jaslok consultants, I really sincerely thank you for that particular one single effort. Thank you very much. And a beautiful talk. Thank you for participating in this conference and being with us. Thank you.
Pleasure.
With Paresh, with your permission, shall I go to the debate section now?
एक मुखरा सुन लेते हैं मिस्टर हरियन से. तो सिंगिंग के बिना उनका टॉक कंप्लीट नहीं होता. See,
okay, then I will. Okay, that's a good thing, Mr. Harian. And अगर मुखरा गाना ही है, तो you should sing the most apt song, because you have overcome the problems and your head is floating above water. So only dons can do this. So let's hear from the real don.
You really put me into a situation.
Don के लिए कौन सा
we know now, we deal with every situation, so this is also okay. I have selected one few lines from one very apt song, so
go ahead.
हंसते गाते जहां से गुजर, दुनिया की तू परवाह न कर. अरे हंसते गाते जहां से गुजर, दुनिया की तू परवाह न कर. मुस्कुराते हुए दिन बिताना, यहाँ कल क्या हो किसने जाना. जिंदगी एक सफर है सुहाना, अब जल्दी से जाए कोरोना.
Super. So
very good.
That reflects your personality. That reflects this. And Jitendra, with your this thing, you inspired me to say 2 lines. रुक जाना नहीं तू कहीं हार के. आगे का लाइन मुझे आता नहीं है, ठीक है.
यही काफी है. रुकना नहीं है, आगे बढ़ो.
रुक जाना. Okay, now let's get on to the second section of the today's program, and that's an interesting section, which is debates. We always have been doing either the medical controversies or the debates. This year we have chosen the topics which are somewhere near the medical and somewhere away from the medical. It's a mix of bags. Now, before we start the debate, let me again reiterate the rules of the debate. For each title, there is somebody who is defending and somebody who is against it. So there is a yes or no. So each speaker will get 8 minutes for presentation. At the end of 7 minutes, there will be a message or a warning telling them that 1 minute left. He has to continue for another minute and end by 8 minutes. If he keeps on continuing 10 seconds after 8 minutes, he will be automatically muted and the screen share will stop. This is just to make sure that every speaker gets exactly the same time. So nobody complains that somebody got more time and had more points to say and therefore got an undue advantage. We are trying to be extremely fair. So in this aspect, it will be fairly ruthless because it is not in our hand. It is being put into the system. So system will do everything automatically at the end of 8 minutes and 10 seconds. Then there is a rebuttal of 3 minutes. And in rebuttal also, the same rules will apply. The similar warning and the similar switching off the screen share and the going on mute. And at the end of the both talks and the rebuttals, there will be an electronic voting. As you know, I got a new partner and the new partner brings in new ideas. So he likes exciting things to do. And so there will be electronic voting. The voting will be open to all the attendees for 30 seconds. There will be a beautiful watch which will tell you that how the 30 seconds are going. Once the 30 seconds are over, you cannot vote. And at the end of that, the results will be shown. And whosoever has got more convincing power, whom we call Mr. Convincer or the Convincer, will get a special prize of a nice, well-wrapped chocolate from Jaslok Hospital. I'm sorry about that. That you can decide later. I forgot to tell one thing. Sorry, Sarosh. I forgot to tell one thing. There is a plaque which has been made for Keynote Address Speaker. But as this is a virtual conference, we could not hand over in person. So it will be sent either to Sarosh's house or will be given to him when he comes to the hospital sometime later. Okay. Now we are back for the debate, and we start with the first debate of the day. And that is the very, very interesting topic. Interesting topic, interesting participants, interesting fighters. I request both the speakers to have a very scientific, very fruitful, and healthy debate. I know it's going to be bulls, two bulls fighting for whatever it is, but I request both bulls not to tear apart each other. So the first topic of the day is SARS-CoV-2 is likely a man-made virus. The doctor who is defending it and says, yes, it is likely a man-made virus is our friend Dr. Rajesh Parekh, who is the director of Department of Psychiatry and Medical Research at Jaslok Hospital and Research Center. And the person who is going to say it is unlikely to be a man-made virus is Dr. Om Shrivastava, or another dear friend, who is the director of Department of Infectious Diseases. Both are highly knowledgeable, outstanding reputation in their own fields. Both are well known, and both are good speakers, have a depth of knowledge and good command over English language. Let us see how they debate out and try to convince us their points. So can I request Dr. Rajesh Parekh to start? And your time starts, Rajesh, now.
Distinguished moderators, members of the House, in moving today's proposition that SARS-CoV-2 is likely a man-made virus, I have a peculiar reverse conflict of interest to declare. In January 2020, when COVID-19 was largely confined to Wuhan, and in fact didn't even have a proper name, we wrote the world's first book. We predicated our assumptions on two factors: the declaration by the scientists of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who emphatically told the world that this was natural and non-man-made. It turns out that assumption on our part was naive. But more important, a letter to the Lancet very early in this pandemic, emphatically insisting there's no possibility this is man-made and this is natural. It being published in the Lancet by 16 prestigious scientists, we took their word for it and in fact declared that it might be a conspiracy to say that this is likely man-made. It is therefore in our interest, members of the House, to argue on the other side so that we prove that what we said was right. Instead, we choose to correct ourselves, while more than 40 other predictions that we made in that book, including the one on the second wave and mutating, right? This one needs to be rectified, and I'd like to do it now. Why do we change this? Two primary reasons. One, it turns out that every single one of those 16 scientists who wrote that letter had conflict of interest tying them to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. More important, not one of them declared it. It's standard practice to declare conflict of interest. They have corrected that just last week with another letter in the Lancet in which they finally declared their conflict of interest. And second, there is a body of evidence which I am privileged to present you today, which is now completely swung the pendulum in the other direction, so as to indicate that indeed the virus is most likely to be man-made. So in the first slide, the evidence that we are going to present to you is viral, based on the intermediary host, based on the disease, circumstantial, and gain of function And finally, AI-generated computational evidence. Maybe I have the next slide, please. In the viral evidence, we shall see that this virus is unlike any other coronavirus, which incidentally have been studied for well over a century. Why is it different? The dreaded S protein that we have heard of has a very peculiar cleavage site called the furin cleavage site, which I shall illustrate presently, which allows it easy and lethal access into the As2 receptor. Maybe you have the next slide, please. And in this slide, we see a pictorial representation of the structure of the virus. May I have the next slide, please? The coronavirus. And in the inset, we shall see the S protein. Madam, I request you to move to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. This is the structure. I'll not delve into it for lack of time. This inset is the dreaded S protein. In that, you see this site, the furin cleavage site, which gives access into the As2 receptor. Now, here is the interesting part. There is a series of 7 viruses which come very close to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Notice here that none of them has the furin cleavage site, only this virus. Please remember this when I point out to you later that in 2017, the Wuhan Institute of Virology published a paper which will give us the final evidence. Can we move on? Now, when we look at the intermediary host, it's 20 months and we do not know what the intermediary host was. The closest possible host becomes the horseshoe bat located in Yunnan province, which has a genetic structure very close to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This bat has been researched for a long time by the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Maybe you have the next slide, please. Now, here is what we see. This is the place where this horseshoe bat resides. This bat migrates no more than 50 kilometers. That's its total area of migration. Wuhan is 1,000 and 1,400 kilometers away from this site. Second, in the month of September, the bat goes into hibernation and does not migrate. 3, it was not sold at all as a food item in the market. Finally, even if the bat were to do the incredible function of migrating 1,400 kilometers when it is supposed to hibernate, nobody on this route has at all fallen ill. Yet the Wuhan Institute has been carrying the bat virus to modify it from this cave to the institute. Can we move on, please? We are now close to 6 minutes. I hope you compensate me. Now, here is the interesting thing. When it comes to the MERS intermediary host, this was discovered in 9 months. The palm civet as the intermediary host of SARS was discovered in 3 months. Closer now, the pig as the intermediary host of the swine flu virus was discovered in a week. And as the technology has got more, as the interest is more, as more people are working on this dreaded pandemic, you would have expected this to go faster. But 20 months, no answer. Is it possible there's no intermediary host? I'd like you to ponder that. Next slide, please. Now, the disease evidence, and I'm going to rush through to compensate for some of the time we've lost. SARS-CoV-2 is substantially different from SARS-CoV-1 and MERS-CoV-2. The Wuhan seafood market we have seen is implausible. They do not have a single animal they sell which could be an intermediary host. And most interesting, several people in the Wuhan Institute of Virology fell ill with a mysterious illness very similar to COVID-19. We don't have time for the details. Can we move on now so I can just rapidly finish my slide? Enormous circumstantial evidence. WHO not informed for 16 weeks. It's standard practice to inform the WHO immediately when there is a viral outbreak. The inspection which should occur immediately did not occur for 16 months. They were finally allowed in January this year. More important, they were not even allowed on the site. They were told to be far away and they were shown photographs, but unprecedented that they were not even shown the site. And widespread censorship. Let's move on. We are now kind of wrapping up. Just an example of a doctor, Li Wenlang, we dedicated our book to him. He pointed out only to his classmates that there was a mysterious illness. He was censored, punished, and finally died. I'm closing. Can we move
45
on?
seconds being added to your time.
Perfect. Thank you. Gain of function evidence, the most important evidence. Gain of function allows us to, in a lab, add a function. So if a virus like the coronavirus, known to be extremely infective, the common cold, can now get an additional function of lethality. This work happened on the H5N1 virus in 2011. This work has been an ongoing collaboration between the National Institute of Health in Washington and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If you recollect, I told you in 2017, they published a paper, not knowing there would be a leak, saying that they had got this furin site to permit human cell infection and increase human cell death. They publicly declared it. And in our book, we warned about this in these last 2 sentences. Please move on. Now 2 more slides. And actually, this, I can make it the final slide. The artificial intelligence, which is objective, which has no bias, was fed in all the probability data. And when all the data is fed in, you will see except one, where is a 95.3% probability of laboratory origin. Everywhere else is about 99. So
time is up, sir.
Thank you. That is my last slide. I leave it now to the House to weigh the evidence.
Thank you, Rajesh. And I invite Dr. Om Srivastava to come back and give his punches and the evidence.
Thank you, Dr. Desai, and thank you, Jaslok Hospital, for this opportunity. I'd like to start with my part of the talk, which talks about why the virus couldn't be man-made, why the virus is natural, right? So quickly, we all know about zoonosis from animals to human beings, either through meat or milk or infected cuts or wounds. In this case, when you say we are looking at an outbreak, the most important feature of an outbreak, which goes from, whether it goes from bats or pangolins or any other creature, you need to know the index case, which is the first patient who got infected. And since there is always a little bit of mystery about this from the beginning in the last 18 months, we are still elusively searching for that index case, from where did it start and from where did it go from wherever it started, whether it was Wuhan or elsewhere in the world. I'd like to draw your attention here to only the third part of the slide, which is the As2 receptors, about which I will talk in just a little while, and why the As2 receptors are so important in the progression of this disease. Why is that it can only be natural? And this is, again, I'm going to speak a little bit about the genomic analysis. There is up to a 96% similarity between SARS-CoV-2 and the bat coronavirus using the whole genome analysis. And therefore, the study of the genome is the most critical part of understanding. Everything else is going to be conjecture, speculation, opinion, but not evidence. Evidence will come only out of study of the genome, which is what we are learning every day about the SARS-CoV-2. So the genome is not something that every living organism is going to be giving you the complete information. There are parts of a genomic analysis which are not quite important. There are parts of a genomic analysis which are critical. They are crucial. They will be giving you the information that only the genomic analysis can give you. And therefore, when you say that I have found that this is where the virus was started, or this is where it was established, and this is where it went from one country to another or another population, you need to have the genomic analysis. As you can see on the slide, it's a very diverse kind of a picture, but genomic analysis is the only way to establish where did the virus start. Now, did it start in a laboratory or was it natural? I'm coming to that. So most of the virus genome comes from a coronavirus that is closely related to a horseshoe bat coronavirus called the rat G13. The all-important receptor, and I'd like to talk about this for a minute, the receptor binding domain, RBD, of the spike protein is closely related to an entirely different coronavirus found in Malaysian pangolin. So the RBD in the spike protein has a very important role. It's beyond the scope of this debate to talk about that, but I can't emphasize enough to you how important the RBD is. And the spike protein has a secret weapon, which is also called the polybasic cleavage site. If you look at the slide, in the interest of time, I'll not be able to describe it in detail. But if you look at this site, the polybasic cleavage site is again crucial in establishing that the spike protein has a diverse presentation. Similar presentation in coming from fowls, animals. And the third part is that the glycans that shield the target from the immune system, because there is a feature that is relevant to the immune system. All these three parts, the RBD, the receptor binding domains, the cleavage site, and the glycans that shield them are important. So what makes SARS so easily spreadable amongst human beings? The spike protein is a very good binding protein to human As2 receptors. Spike protein can be activated in a wide range of cells because of the polybasic cleavage site, and the spike protein might be able to hide from the antibodies of the immune system, which is why the glycan shield comes into picture. The spike protein, therefore, is something that is crucial in how the virus is going to behave in people who are infected with one virus, or if the virus is changing from patient to patient or person to person, or from community, country, whatever. So the RBD portion, the receptor binding domain, has evolved so effectively to target a molecular feature outside the human cell that is called the As2 receptor, which is, of course, present in other tissues, but also involved in regulating the blood pressure. COVID protein also is effective in binding to human cells. In fact, it is the result of natural selection and not the product of genetic engineering. Adaptation, again, it's a very important feature. Most scientific reports believe that polybasic cleavage and mutation of the spike proteins are the mechanisms behind the adaptation of the beta coronavirus group to humans. These are the two important parts of the polybasic of the SARS virus in adaptation, so that it does not get identified or caught, and that's what works in its favor. The two receptors, the two features, which are the mutations in the RBD portion of the spike protein and the distinct backbone, rules out any laboratory manipulation as a potential origin of SARS-CoV-2. Again, so the backbone differed substantially from those of already known coronaviruses and mostly resembled related viruses found in bats and pangolins. And this is the evidence for natural evolution. Also, with the mutation rate of the virus, the RNA virus have a mutation rate which is up to 1 million times higher than their hosts. These high rates are correlated with enhanced virulence, and therefore this is considered to be beneficial for viruses, and therefore the mistakes that come in their replication. So I think that for a virus to have a mutation that is 1 million times bigger than the host, for a virus to be manufactured like that in the laboratory, you would have to have a technology that is far advanced than what we have at this time. There doesn't appear to be even a shred of scientific evidence to support this postulate. Natural origin, again, analysis of public genome, sequencing data from SARS-CoV-2 and related viruses found no evidence that the virus was made in a laboratory or otherwise engineered. And I'm going to take you to the last part of this part, where the experimental tools and what the literature says. What the literature says, experiment tools to engineer such a virus do not exist. International researchers conclude.
1 minute left in your presentation, sir.
Sure. COVID-19 is not man-made. Scientists are tired of explaining that COVID-19 virus was not made in a laboratory. WHO all but confirms that virus is not man-made. And there are other distinguished people like Nobel laureates who also look at the evidence and say that the COVID lab leak does not hold up. So I'm going to stop at this point. The evidence is so clear from people, from researchers, from labs, from other authorities, that if there was something to show that it is man-made, it would have shown up by now. So far, it hasn't shown up. So it is most likely to be in the other direction. I'm going to stop here. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Om, for a very scientific, fairly convincing presentation. Now it's the turn of Rajesh to do the rebuttal.
Do I begin?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to thank my colleague on the other side for giving us a basic undergraduate lesson on how epidemics spread and how viruses move. I would have assumed our distinguished house was aware of all of that already, and instead focused on the evidence which indicates that this is likely to be man-made. His one compelling argument was that 96% of the genetic structure of this virus is similar to the genetic structure of earlier viruses. Let me inform him that 96%, exactly the same number, the genetic structure of the human and the chimpanzee is identical. Just by that, we cannot say that humans are chimpanzees because there's a 96% overlap. So, sir, kindly do not make monkeys out of us. As far as the backbone of the virus, the backbone of the human, the rat, the cat, all mammals are alike. That again does not indicate that humans are either rats or mice. It is the remaining 4% which we cannot explain, which makes the critical difference between this virus and the other. As far as the Hoshbat hypothesis, we've already shown. It can move 50 kilometers. This site is 1400 kilometers. It hibernates in winter and it has not infected along the way. As to the fusion cleavage site, thank you for showing the slide that we had shown earlier. You have again illustrated that this is only coronavirus which has this peculiarity thing. And you said that the tools do not exist, sir. That's factually incorrect. As I pointed out, the tools very much exist. In 2011, a paper was published. In 2017, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, we've cited that paper, published that they had been able to engineer this and they had actually infected and even killed human cells. They didn't anticipate there would be a leak. So they have said it, that the tools exist, and they clearly exist. I'm glad you brought up Lou Montaigne here. You were wrong, sir. He is the one Nobel laureate who has consistently said, right from day one, that this is a man-made. This is not natural. That has been his position from day one. So he's the one scientist who's not conflicted. The scientists you have quoted have all written letters. A letter to a journal is very different from evidence. It's an opinion. And I had a slide to show you the paper that appeared in the Lancet just last week. The same 16 scientists who wrote a letter a year ago screaming, this cannot be man-made, now wrote a letter. The conflict of interest is a whole page. Every one of them is conflicted. In contrast to that, a year ago, they wrote one sentence, no conflict of interest. This was completely dishonest. They have rectified it 18 months later, but they have corrected it. So these people are conflicted. Luc Montaigne is not. Members of the House decide. There has been a fire. In that fire, you have all been affected. People close to you, our brethren, have died. The person where the fire started does not allow an inspection inside. They want you to see photographs outside. They have boasted in the past that they are capable of creating the fire. It is very important that we vote judiciously. I thank you for your attention.
Om, rebuttal from you, please.
Okay. Thank you again. I would like to think that the last 2 minutes were, a very quick reflection of a bad Hindi movie where there are multiple roles. So it appears that the same person who is saying something that I am quoting has said something else to my very learned, esteemed opponent. I have to say that you're trying to tell me that a letter is more important than literature that is published. I find that, for lack of any polite term, I'm not going to quantify that. But is literature less important than a letter? How does that work in science platform? So I'm going to say a few quick things here. Man-made viruses have surfaced in multiple countries and have different genomic fingerprinting in the background of a virus that demonstrates viral mutations. All viruses will leave a genomic fingerprint wherever they replicate, either inside a lab or in a natural habitat. So I'd like to draw the attention of my esteemed opponent into the last two lines of this. Wherever your virus is made, you will need to be able to show that it can be having a fingerprint that can be replicated. Unfortunately, that has not been the case so far, sir. I would like to think that if that is the case, it would have been, that debate would have closed by now. Whether the virus is lab-made or man-made, that evidence has not yet been established, and that everything so far is only a matter of conjecture and speculation and not evidence. Recent discoveries have revealed that the evidence of the virus around the world before it emerged in Asia, and I'd like to say this very emphatically, that the virus actually has been present in a number of places, including Barcelona. I'm coming to that. There is growing evidence.
So you have 1 minute left.
Yes. Growing evidence of the true origin of the global organism that was waiting for favorable conditions to emerge instead of originating in China. So again, a natural virus will seek a favorable condition to find a place where it will come out and replicate and infect others. And it was not necessarily China, because this virus had been identified in a number of other places all over the world far, far before the outbreak got described in China in the last quarter of 2019. Recent testing of sewage in Barcelona in Spain suggested that the virus may have been present in the Spanish city as far back as March 2019, many, many months before China identified the pathogen in the city of Wuhan in December. So let me just try and put this, the virus, as I'm being told, was manufactured in a laboratory, okay? It went from one small city in Wuhan and did not spread to Shanghai and Beijing in the same country.
Your time is up, sir.
And on its way, it stopped at Italy. And that makes it a very good story that comes out of those comics that we have read, when we were growing up, which is The Adventures of Tintin. I'd like to thank the organizing committee and the House for a patient hearing. Thank you also to Dr. Parekh for all the information that you have given.
So we had a great debate. Both of them have given very convincing arguments with conviction. Super, I love that. And now the ground is open for all of us to vote. We already have the polling, which is complete. The polling results are SARS-CoV-2 is likely a man-made virus. Those in favor of yes are 76%. And those who are in present of no are 24%. So we have a convincing opinion in favor of it being likely a man-made virus. Good. Congratulations, both participants. Congratulations, Rajesh. You will get your chocolate. Well-wrapped chocolate box, I hope.
Thank you, sir. I hope it's not a virtual chocolate. Thank you.
We don't know. We don't know. You have to ask. So I am giving you a virtual promise.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Om, for a very, very exciting debate and good points which you brought up and kept the entire house completely attentive. Thank you. Love you. We go to the next debate, which is equally interesting in terms of the topic. That is, who should lead a cardiac transplant program in an institute? The speaker who is saying that cardiologists should do it is Dr. Niyar Mehta, who is our consultant department of cardiology at Jaslok Hospital. He is a very popular figure, especially amongst the fair sex. I thank you, Niyar, for actually it is his child's birthday week. Normally he goes out of Bombay to celebrate that, but this time he has decided to stay in Bombay for participating in this program and debate. I sincerely thanks Niyar for that. And then we have the speaker who is defending and saying that cardiac surgeon should be in charge is Dr. Hemant Pathare, who is our additional director, Heart and Lung Transplant Program at Jaslok. I don't know from where Hemant is making his presentation, whether he's making it from his home or his beautiful farmhouse sitting next to his pool. But yeah, he's a dynamic man, and it will be interesting to listen to both of them. This pair reminds me of the Roman days in an arena where the gladiators are fighting. So let's see. Nihar, to start with, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for the lovely introduction. And in lieu of the upcoming chocolate, which I'm sure I'm going to get, I will like to convince everyone of how the role of a cardiologist is so important when it comes to a cardiac transplant program, and how it is important that we understand what it is to do a transplant and how it is important to get each person's role identified in photo. Now, we do understand that heart failure, at least 5 or 10% of all heart failure patients have an extremely poor quality of life, and their only option remaining towards the end is a heart transplant. And very proudly, India has accelerated its heart transplant program over the last 4 to 5 years, where it is doing close to 300 transplants over every second year. And even the organ donation drives have really accelerated, which is why this topic is so important, because the decision making is everything when it comes to heart transplant. This is how a person's life can change when they are offered a heart transplant versus just left to die. And these decisions of when to take up a person for a heart transplant are absolutely important. Now, before we go into the next few slides, let's understand that we are talking not about a person who suddenly comes and crashes and requires a transplant. Yes, there are some of those, but we are talking more of people who gradually keep worsening in their heart failure, keep getting worse in terms of their, in spite of medications. And these are the patients who we need to start listing and then posting and then getting a transplant for to improve their quality of life. Now, the indications according to these guidelines are lots, and I'm not getting into the nitty-gritties of these because these are very technical. But in a nutshell, what are we treating? What are we offering when we send a patient for a transplant? Someone with refractory cardiogenic shock, chronic heart failure, not responding to medications, refractory angina, ischemia just not getting better in spite of all options, arrhythmias which are refractory, many congenital heart diseases. Now, when you think of all these diseases, who is the person who you're going to go to? Who is the person who's going to be treating these? It is the cardiologist, not the cardiothoracic surgeon. And these diseases, it is the cardiologist's decision to tell the patient that, look, we are now beyond the point of medications and therapies where heart transplant is probably a better option. So since the supply of organs is still inadequate, the allocation of the donor heart is the most important decision to make, because if we send a person too early, they will deprive a more seriously ill patient, and therefore the timing is important so that the benefit is maximal. And very important to realize is that cardiac transplant is not a cure. It is associated with its own problems, its own long-term issues, and those we will come to in the next few slides. But once we realize these long-term problems, we realize how essential it is that to make this decision in absolute certainty. In a nutshell, when we talk about patients who've achieved maximal medical therapy by the cardiologist, after giving alternate therapy options, revascularizations, bypass, resynchronization therapy, only then should they be offered a listing for the transplant. And who is the one who decides that maximal medical therapy? Yes, it is the cardiologist. In the pre-transplant workup, there are a lot of things which are done. Lab tests, immunological workups, serology, all these things are done as knee-jerk reactions. We have a protocol. Our pathologists and laboratory specialists will send this without a problem. But it is the cardiological and cardiovascular investigations of the ECG, a detailed 2D echo with all the possible hemodynamics, exercise testing with oxygen consumption evaluation, the VO2 max, which we keep talking about, and our left and right heart catheterizations, which are all extremely important. Now, even when the patient is taken up for a bypass, for the transplant, it is the surgeon will always ask for the cath. The cath is kept in the OT and kept ready so that they see the cath data. And who provides that cath data? It is none other than the cardiologist. So far, every step of the way, from working up the patient, listing the patient, it is the cardiologist who is making the decisions. In the donor selection, there is a large number of things that is worked up. The patients, when they are donating their organ, a lot of parameters are checked by the intensivists, by the neurologists in special. But when they are over a certain age, they need a coronary angiogram. And who does that coronary angiogram? Nobody can do that except for a cardiologist. So once again, not only the recipient, but even for the donor, it's important to have a cardiologist stand by there and doing these procedures. Now, when it comes to the perioperative management is absolutely essential, because there is a balance you need to create between the immunosuppression to prevent rejection and to prevent infections. Now, why we want to do this to a pure certainty? Because there's a large number of infections and there's a lot of problems in terms of rejection. This decision is very important to be made between the entire team, including the cardiologist, the cardiothoracic surgeon, and the nephrologist. But when it comes to the complications, which is rejection, the following is very important. That is, in the recipients, the 30% of these people start getting some amount of rejection. And this occurs at various cellular levels, from cell-mediated rejection, antibody-mediated rejection, and of course the hyperacute rejection. And how do these patients present not only when they are in the hospital, but when they are back home? Majority are asymptomatic. Just some early heart failure, palpitations, mild arrhythmias, and then when they become very severe, it goes to quite a florid presentation. But how do we know? How do we know that a person is getting this whole part of rejection? Because your immunosuppression has to be tailor-made for your patient based on whether he is in rejection or not. And the answer to that is the endomyocardial biopsy. And this is the schedule which has been recommended once every week for the first 4 weeks, every 2 weeks for 6 weeks, every month for 3 to 4 months, every 3 months to the end of the year. You can imagine.
Sir, you have 1 minute left in your presentation.
And every year subsequently. And who does that? None other than the cardiologist. This is a cardiologist's forte to do the biopsy. An important aspect of heart transplant is the late cardiac allograft vasculopathy. And this is the important cause of death. And the only way to diagnose this is to do a coronary angiogram with an intravascular ultrasound. And as you all know, who does that? None other than the cardiologist. As you can see, there is a lot of internal thickening. The angio looks similar, but the IVIS shows a difference. So to conclude, a leader of a transplant program should be one who's providing the clear, compelling direction, transplant or no, immunosuppression or no, how to follow them up. And that is what the cardiologist's prerogative is, to optimize the medical management, then time their listing, work them up, and then, of course, in the perioperative and postoperative period, manage the immunosuppression, biopsies, angiographies, and so on and so forth. So, without any doubt,
your time is up, sir.
Cardiologist who is the leader. I would like to end with this slide where this is our entire team with our first transplant patient. And we're very proud of me to say that there are 3 cardiologists in this photo, but only 2 cardiothoracic surgeons. Thank you.
Thanks, Nihar. As usual, smooth, well presentation, good presentation. Can we request Dr. Hemant Pathare for his presentation and his points?
Thank you, Dr. Desai. Thank you, Paresh. Thank you, my colleagues, for giving me a chance to participate in this lovely debate. Okay, so who should lead the heart transplant program in an institute? It's a no-brainer, actually, but I'm compelled to debate on an obvious fact. It was an excellent presentation by young Dr. Nihar Mehta, who is one of my favorite cardiologists, incidentally, and as to who should lead the program. As of date, 1,147 heart transplants has been done as of date, including one done yesterday. All the decisions that are made by cardiologists, according to him, are actually made by us as well, and actually should be made by us. My next slide, please. These are my disclosures. I have received an official amnesty from Professor A.B. Mehta for daring to participate in this debate. But let's go. So you see, Dr. A.B. Mehta has never lost a debate till date, but his name was replaced at the last minute by young Dr. Nihar Mehta. Obviously, I think Dr. ABM wants to keep his record intact. So let's go on. Heart failure has medical and surgical aspects of management. Nihar has very properly elucidated the medical management. Heart transplantation is for those who are symptomatic despite maximal medical therapy. So where the role of a cardiologist ends, mine starts. I'd like to give all of you to give a small thought to this dynamic cardiac surgeon, Padma Bhushan, Dr. Prafulla Kumar Sen, who headed the Department of Cardiovascular and Thoracic Surgery at KEM Hospital, Mumbai, who did the 6th heart transplant in the world on 17th of February, 1968. That's more than 50 years ago. What ain't broke, don't change. Dr. Krishan Barnard, the director of cardiac transplantation at the Grotius Cure Hospital, Cape Town, Padma Bhushan Dr. P.K. Sen of the King Edward Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, Dr. Komarakshi Balakrishnan from the MGM Hospital, Chennai, T.S. Sundar, Chief of Apollo Hospitals, Chennai, Padma Shri Paninkapani Venugopal, the Chief of AIIMS, New Delhi, Padma Bhushan K.M. Cherian from the Frontier Lifeline, Anvay More from HN Reliance Hospital, Kumud Dhital, the in charge of Jashoda Hospital, Hyderabad, Manas Durayaraj, the head of Sahyadri Hospital Heart Transplantation Program, Pune, Paul Jans, St. Vincent's Hospital, Sydney, Silvana Marasco, the Alfred, Melbourne, Sir Magdi Yako from the Harefield Hospital, London. What's common amongst all of these? All of these are the heads of the cardiac transplant program in their respective hospitals, and all of them are heart transplant surgeons. None of them is a cardiologist. So what ain't broke, don't change. So when you think of cardiology, what do you think of? Coronary, 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 PTCA, rotablation, coronary with rotablation, coronary with rotablation with IVUS, coronary with more rotablation, coronary with still more rotablation. That's what a normal person thinks of when they think of cardiology. Sorry. I think I forgot one more. Yeah, there's something down there which says PPI, CRTD, AICD. I think there's heart failure down there somewhere. So a very small portion of cardiologists are actually interested in heart failure. The rest of them are interventional cardiologists. Does the visiting cardiologist ever say heart failure specialist? No, it's interventional cardiologist. Do they ever tell you how many heart failure patients they treat? No, they just have done 85,000 PTCAs. Nobody ever mentions it. So basically, when you have an acute pandemic, how many cardiologists would come in and do a PAMI at any hospital in Mumbai for a non-VVIP patient? Very, very few. Patient invariably receives thrombolysis and a PAMI is carried out at a convenient time. I'll give you a case scenario. The first BIVAD in Jaslok, our start time was 9:30 p.m. Our end time was 3:30 a.m. Blood loss, 1 unit of blood. The SGPT was 9,500, SGOT was 12,500, creat was 3.7. NT-proBNP was through the roof. It was 33,500. Platelet count of 48,000, INR of 6, AB positive, only 2 units of blood available. LVEF 10%, RVEF 15%. I came in for Jaslok and my team did the first BIVAD in Western India. All the well-meaning cardiologists in Jaslok told me not to do such a foolhardy case. I knew what I was doing. They didn't. Clearly, a cardiac transplant surgeon should be in charge of the department. Passion runs high amongst us, transplant surgeons, because we have spent a sweat and blood for it. We sit with the patient by his bedside. We stand for hours in the OT to achieve success against unbelievable odds. When the cardiologists have their back to the wall, they call us. Our commitment is 100%. Nihar has already mentioned the inclusion criteria for heart transplant. Basically, all of these are indications for heart transplant surgery. This is where the cardiologists stop, and this is where we start. Next, please. Basically, we are trained for heart transplant surgery. The cardiologists are not. Ask any operated patient, who is your doctor? The answer is going to be the name of the transplant surgeon, not the referring cardiologist. We form bridges towards our destination. We form a bridge to decision, a bridge to recovery, a bridge to transplant. Who decides all this? We do, the cardiac transplant surgeons. We have armamentarium of ECMO, CentriMac, BIVAD, LVAD, artificial heart, and then finally a heart transplant. So a heart transplant department has to do all this. And who does all this? It's obviously heart transplant surgeon. So that's my hand, and that is holding a VAD. Incidentally, there's just a picture of Diego Maradona in 1986 with the hand of God goal. It's just incidentally there. There are no parallels to be drawn, of course. This is what I use. I'm able to get a heart at room temperature or at 34 degrees and keep it alive to avoid the negative effects of cold ischemic storage. All this is done by cardiothoracic surgery. A picture is worth 1,000 words. That's me taking out a diseased heart, waiting for a new heart. This is a motion picture. It's not even a picture. It's a motion picture. I should try to play this. Can you see it playing? So that's what I do. This is the picture you see. Can a cardiologist do this? No. So it should be done by someone who does this. So going to my next slide. So basically, all said and done in conclusion, a heart transplant is a surgical procedure, and the program needs to be headed by a surgeon with inputs from our friendly cardiologists, anesthetists, intensivists, ID specialists, pathologists. Over a period of time, the period amalgamates and works seamlessly so that finally there is no hierarchy, and the head of the program should be the heart failure patient himself or herself, for whose benefit we should all work. The ultimate head of is the transplant patient, and the heart team, including us and the cardiologists, work together to achieve the best result, at the same time understanding each other's limitations. Coalition is the need of the hour, not collision. Kyunki dar ke aage jeet hai. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for lovely presentation. Now it's Nihar's turn for rebuttal. Nihar, are you around?
Yes, very much, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would like to thank my very esteemed opponent for a very lovely presentation on heart transplant with lovely anecdotes and lovely cases which we have all been a part of. And I would like to start by saying that what Dr. Pathare showed about the whole programs of heart transplant being led by various cardiothoracic surgeons, we need to look a little more broader than what that slide showed, because when it comes to the global level, when we talk about institutions which are pristine like Mayo and Columbia and institutions all over in Europe, their transplant programs are led never by only a cardiac surgeon, but they're always co-headed by a cardiologist who is a heart failure specialist. Yes, the need of the hour is to have heart failure specialists who are dedicated to it, but those heart failure specialists will definitely be at the helm of the heart transplant program. And why is that? Because although a cardiologist will always think coronary, no denying that, but what will the transplant surgeon do after the transplant is over and the patient comes 1 year later with rejection? He's not going to take him back to the OT and change his heart again. He's going to talk to the cardiologist and say, please, can you please do a coronary with IVIS? Don't do rotablation, but do the coronary and the IVIS in the cath lab. Please, Mr. Cardiologist, do that so that we can document the rejection. Can that be done in the OT? No way. Then what about patients who have rejection? The biopsies which have to be done frequently. Again, it is the cardiologist who will be the one who will be providing that sample. The pathologist is not going to go to the OT and take out the sample which was transplanted. That has been thrown in the dustbin long back. It is a new sample which comes only from the cath lab, from the cardiologist's biopsy needle.
Sir, you have 1 minute left.
Which will give us the evidence of rejection or not. And Dr. Pathare will very kindly agree that that is the crux of treatment in terms of immunosuppression. So I would like my opponent to get out of the operation theater and think bigger, from working up the patient to building them up for a transplant, and then after the transplant to keep them healthy, not just do the transplant and shut the doors. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nia. Hemant, it's your turn for the rebuttal.
It's a typical case of cardiology putting their finger in yet another pie. One actually they are only a small part of. You see, it's been far too long and this has to change. As I said, it's basically a heart team concept. It's not you or me. But for example, listing of a patient is not done by cardiology. The listing is always done by us, by me. Cardiac surgeons, a transplant surgeon has the final say in listing of any patient. So it's not Nihar or AB ma'am who can say. They may propose, but it is for me to say yes or no. If there are two patients, two donors on any particular day, the decision to transplant one of them is going to be the cardiac transplant surgeons, not cardiologists. As far as rejection is concerned, yes, rejection is important. We all are trained for it. In fact, even more than the cardiologists, the cardiac surgeons are trained for it. And we don't need a CT, we don't need a coronary angio. A CT coronary is good enough. I think Srinivas Desai ji can do that for us. So, EMB schedule, the schedule of biopsies, as Nihar correctly pointed out, he gave us the correct schedule. But is that followed? No, we have to tailor-made it to India. So all over India, the schedule that is followed is not one biopsy every week, once in every fortnight, once in every 3 months. No, it's one before going home at 3 weeks, one at 3 months, and then one at 1. You have to tailor-make solutions to here. Ask Mayo, ask Columbia. The heart failure cardiologist listens to the surgical director of heart surgery and not the other way around, because as such, they work as a team. So what more can I say? As far as machinery is concerned, for example, ECMO machines are required by the Department of Heart Transplant Surgery. A cardiologist would say, okay, they have one ECMO machine, the box is ticked. No, you need more than 2 or 3, at least 3 ECMO machines at any given time to run a sensible cardiac transplant program. Just like a cardiologist wants 2 cath labs, a cardiac surgeon requires at least 3 ECMO machines. A cardiologist would not appreciate that. They will just tick the box, ECMO machine tick. So as I said, at the back of it, it has to be a cardiac surgeon who has to head the program. Why do you want to change this? Worldwide, everybody follows it. What is it that you are going to do different? That's all I have to say. And at the end of it, I must say, we do all work as a team. That's it. With the patient being the center of the spoke, and all of us are the spokes of wheel. Yes, cardiothoracic surgery has a large spoke, I must admit it. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Nihar, for being there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hemant. Thank you, Nihar, for a very interesting, friendly, but nice debate. Nice debate. Now, let us throw it open for the voting. Pretty interesting. Now, as there are larger number of people who have voted, I'm going to read out the numbers of the people rather than the percentage. Also, I will say the percentage also. So, for a debate of who should lead a cardiac transplant program in an institute, those in favor of cardiologists leading it are 125, which is 30% of the total who have voted. Against those feeling that cardiac surgeon should lead are 293, which forms 70% of the total. Thank you, Nihar. Thank you, Hemant, for a very interesting debate, making it healthy, making it nice, making it very, very informative. So kind of you, of both of you, for being here with us. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I shall share half my chocolate with Nihar.
Now, yes, the box you can share, because you are, as you kept on saying, it's a team. But please give half of the chocolate to the patient and rest half you share. Because
Yes,
you're saying the patient is the leader. So whatever the box comes, okay? Thank you, Emma. Thanks, Nihar. And
this debates had been construed by Srinivas with some particular thoughts in his mind, I should say. And they have to be ticklish thoughts, because now he has pitted two parties against each other. And that is going to be difficult, because two parties arguing against each other sensibly is something that is a treat. So let us hear a very senior Dr. J.D. Sunawala, Director of Infectious Disease, and a friend of mine, Petrus Vadia, coordinator of the Department of Neurosciences, Neurology, debate against each other about whether one should do a video consultation. It's a topic of the day. We all do, and we all know what happens when we have to consult a patient on video. So let us hear from both the learned speakers as to whether we should do video consultations or we should stop doing that. Petrus is the first one. So he's going to talk to us about whether we should do the video consultation, and then it will be followed by Dr. Jamshed Sunawala. On to you, Petrus.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Dr. Srinivas Desai, Jaslok Hospital, and Dr. Paresh Doshi for inviting me to present this debate. I think all of us have been doing video consultation thanks to the pandemic. So most doctors have experienced video consultation. The government of India has permitted telemedicine in the pandemic. It has been, in fact, shown to be feasible and beneficial. A lot of home isolation patients have been treated by video consultation, apart from many others who did not have COVID as well. We all know that challenges do exist in video consultation. You can't do a full physical examination. It takes longer. There are network issues, but not that they're not surmountable. Once the pandemic is over, my question to the House is, are we going to go back to only physical consultations? Or are we going to see our patients who live 1,500 kilometers away using video consultations when they're traveling just for a 15-minute consult for about a full day? Video consultation is probably actually see the patient. You can inspect the patient. In fact, in neurology, you can test gait. You can, in fact, test for ataxia. You can test for movements. So a lot of the things can be tested on a video consultation. To understand where we stand on teleconsultation, I circulated a simple 7-question pilot survey to consultants in Jaslok and also the neurologists in Mumbai as we go on. 98% have used video consultation for treating their patients, and the only 1% who didn't use the video consultation actually belong to a branch that you cannot do video consultation. It has been going on well with any heard in America. And in fact, amongst the survey, I asked a lot of the consultants whether they were doing video consultation pre-COVID. And more than 50% of the respondents said they were doing video consultations either sometimes or rarely. So it's not something that wasn't there before COVID. Telemedicine has been used in the treatment of acute myocardial infarction. It is helping stroke thrombolysis in peripheral centers. And in fact, the SceneRay DBS system can remotely program a patient sitting thousands of kilometers away. So we can do DBS programming remotely as well in certain devices. And where do we stand in India? ISRO's contribution to telemedicine began in 2001. They started linking one of the Chennai's hospital to a rural hospital in Andhra Pradesh. and they have expanded to 45 remote and rural hospitals. This is 2019 June, mind you, pre-COVID. And the remote nodes, they are able to do telemedicine for places like Andaman, Nicobar, Lakshadweep, hilly areas of Jammu and Kashmir, and the far-flung areas of Odisha, where super specialty care is far from possible. So what are the biggest challenges that we face when we have to use video consultation? And the biggest challenge that most respondents have reported is that you're unable to fully examine the patient physically. And about 40% have responded the fear of medical legal repercussions. And of course, it is a little time consuming. So how do we surmount these challenges? The technology is one aspect. I mean, we've already had some technological glitches today where we've had network issues, but with better penetration of 5G technology, hopefully that should be less of an issue. Inability to do a physical exam, that remains still a big issue. But as far as many branches of medicine, like dermatology, like psychiatry, where you don't need a detailed physical examination, probably this is going to be a big way. Even in neurology and movement disorders, there are various video adaptations of scales which can be used, and I'll be showing some of them as we go on. The medical legal concerns remain, but there is a clear Telemedicine Act in place, and I think we all have to put a disclaimer that this consultation was done on a video that makes it very clear that we haven't seen the patient physically. As far as the time-consuming part is, yes, it is time-consuming. You have to have pre-consultation planning. You need to have all the list of medicines that the patient is taking, all the list of investigations prior to the consultation. But yes, with that, you can do a fairly good consult. And maybe we need to build differently for online consultations rather than what we do for a physical consultation. These are the various studies. They've shown that you can rank dystonia very clearly, that we have a video-based analysis for Parkinson's, and this has been reviewed in 2021 and shown that you can very well evaluate most of the parameters of Parkinson's on a video-based examination. Now there are smartphone softwares which are able to use sensors and rate Parkinson's disease also. So in the realm of movement disorders, a lot of strides have been made to validate video-based examination compared to a physical examination to bridge the gap that we face when we don't see a patient physically. The medical legal aspects that I already mentioned, we have telemedicine practice guidelines already put in place. So the question that I asked everybody is, what is the risk of causing harm to your patient during a physical consultation? This is specifically when you're seeing a new patient. And 71% of the said they feel that there is a minimal risk to patients. So most people feel that we can safely do a video consultation. And how confident are we in seeing new patients? About 88% of the Jaslok consultants felt that they were reasonably confident to treat new patients online. And about 79% of the Mumbai neurologists felt they were reasonably confident to see patients online. So I'm going to stop the argument at this point by saying video consultation has potential to reduce the inequalities of healthcare across geographies. Video consultation has received a boost. Video consultation is the way forward, and it is likely to remain post-COVID. And I strongly feel we'll have to move with the times, and we'll have to adapt to video consultation. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Petrus. A very nice presentation to argue in favor of video consultation. We would like to hear now Dr. Jamshed Sunawala arguing against the video consultation concept. Dr. Sunawala, please. Dr. Sunawala, you are muted.
I'm sorry.
Yes. No problem. Yes.
This is why I don't use video consultation.
A very good illustration.
My debating subject today on this vast virtual platform is against virtual consultation as a practice of the future. I'm sorry that I have not made any slides, that I don't need slides to emphasize that video consultation is only a fad of the pandemic and is not sustainable in the future. Unfortunately, most literature I reviewed initially favored video consultation, and I was quite despondent that the dice was heavily loaded against me. So I had to think about it in my own practical way. What were the problems of video consultation which I was faced with in the last 1.5 years? Well, the proponents of video consultation gave the advantages of video consultation as quoted by this author, basically related to the following: uninterrupted dialogue, comfortable environment for the patient,
avoiding this discomfort of long hours of waiting in doctors' consulting rooms, avoiding traffic rush and parking problems. All this seemed to be very frivolous to me. But these are only inconveniences which are acceptable trade-offs. Convenience does not cure, diagnosis cures. Many doctors too are known for the love of new technology. But by virtual consultation, we are embracing the most imprecise form of consultation. It may not be traditional. I would say it is the most imprecise form of consultation to a population which will soon not require social distancing once the pandemic is over. The proponents of virtual consultation in the various articles argue that lab reports, imaging, ECGs, and echo substitute for physical examination. Nothing can be further from the truth. For one, these reports are interpretation by respective specialists in isolation. And because of that, they write always down below in the investigation should be clinically correlated and are devoid of a holistic diagnosis and judgment. Let us move from these absurdities and come back to reality by citing my own faux pas and gaps. Often they were ludicrous situations, such as an elderly couple focusing on the fan instead of the patient, and another focusing on the chin instead of the shin. One housemaid helping an elderly lady because she was hard of hearing to communicate with me, but she herself could only speak Tamil. It was really absurd. But besides these groups and rigmaroles, there were serious diagnostic mishaps uncovered later on physical examination. I would like to quote only 3 such examples, but there were many such examples. On virtual consultation with me, a patient complained of continuous fever with pain in the throat. His CBC and other routine tests were normal, except for an ESR of 70. I had asked him to consult the ENT because I thought it was more psychiatric. His symptoms seemed to be more psychiatric than anything else, more psychosomatic. Not getting an appointment with an ENT, he saw me in person. I found marked tenderness over the thyroid and confirmed the diagnosis of thyroiditis, which I would have missed otherwise on virtual consultation. Probably the ENT surgeon would have found it on examination. The second was on virtual consultation was a lady, it was not my patient, it was some other doctor who complained of fever of 10 days duration to her physician, who treated her as Cox on the basis of a past history of tuberculosis, ESR of 80, a positive 1 to 20 millimeters, and the fact that there was no other abnormal finding on her investigation. The patient, for a moment, the fever subsided, but soon the fever reappeared because she omitted levofloxacin of her tuberculosis regime as she could not tolerate it. It's then that she consulted me in person. I detected a mild edema of the right leg with slightest redness over the shin and some scratch marks on the lower aspect of the leg, all of which was so subtle that it could not have been easily missed. It could have been easily missed on video recording. The unilateral edema was due to lymphedema. Secondly, to an old oophorectomy which was done because of CA ovaries on the same side. And the diagnosis was, of course, cellulitis. Otherwise, she would have been taking anti-Cox therapy for almost 9 months or more. The third was an interesting case of a patient who came to me for once again. I could not understand his signs or symptoms about upper respiratory trouble. And I thought, okay, he again rang me up. And I just couldn't make out anything. But he himself said, "Doctor, I want in-person consultation with you. Please examine me." I said, "Fine. he never gave me any other history except harping on this uneasiness all over here, there. And I thought this was, again, very, very vague. When I examined him and I was auscultating his chest, to my surprise, I found an interscapular murmur. And then I asked him, do you have any difficulty walking? He waited for some time. Then he gave me the history of intermittent claudication. And the femorals were feeble on examination. And the diagnosis clear, I'm sure, to all of you what it was, and which one could have missed in this young man. I wonder how my worthy opponent does a neurological examination on virtual consultation. I would like to see him using a hammer and showing it in the hand. Okay, but that's up to him. He gave an example of a skin doctor, dermatologist, who can easily recover. But I've seen twice that a skin doctor said, I would like to see this person in person, because most often the pictures don't come out so clear.
All this is 1 minute left in your presentation.
Right. All this is fine, but is there any evidence to show that the old definition practice of physical examination really makes a difference? Yes, there are a few studies, but the most impressive study is by D.M. Reddy in Lancet 2003, where careful physical examination changed the diagnosis and treatment in 26 out of 100 cases. More remarkable fact of the study was that if the relevant physical findings had not been discovered, the diagnosis would have been apparent only when the disease had progressed and the patient was worse. There are many such examples, even quoted in NEJM. Finally, it is all about physical examination, which you are deprived of on virtual consultation. According to the words of the clinician Paul Hyman, described the disappearance of physical examination as losing touch. And he recommends that every sick man and woman deserves a first consultation in person, no matter how many virtues of virtual medicine are extolled. Thank you.
Petrus, it's your chance to give a rebuttal for 3 minutes.
My esteemed opponent, first of all, is one of the rare physicians who examines the patient thoroughly from top to toe in today's era. So yes, I can understand his discomfort, the lack of a detailed physical exam. But at the same time, I think you have to realize that we are not saying that we are going to completely replace physical examinations with video consultations, but in a select population, yes, video consultations have a role. A person who's coming for a routine follow-up for a diagnosed disease, you could easily probably do it on a phone, especially the person is going to travel 24 hours or 48 hours one way just to come and meet you and get an opinion. So I think this is the views of the survey. Would you continue to do video consultations post-COVID? And 56% of the Jaslok consultants says that they would do both follow-up and new, while 26% they said they do only follow-up. While the neurologists were a little more cautious, with 50% saying they will continue to do follow-up, and about 25% say they'll also see new patients. So yes, I do agree with Dr. Sonavala. It's not possible to do a detailed lower motor neuron examination on a video consultation. We accept those limitations, but I think in select patients, you have to call the patient. But that does not mean that for every patient who has a follow-up appointment or who has a simple migraine, who's 1,000 kilometers away, we need to call them in person to physically examine them. And I think I'll leave the debate at this point and let you all decide as to whether you all will continue video consultations for patients who are far off, far-flung, who have no access to medical care, or would you insist that they come and meet you in person despite the duration of travel, etc.? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Petrus. And now Dr. Sonavala can give his rebuttal.
It was very interesting, Petrus, all that you have said. And in your last slide also, was a very honest slide about the statistics. But the main thing that you talked about is to reach people thousands of miles away. I just written it down after you spoke about it, that individual teleconsult is still the prerogative of the urban and the privileged. You will agree on that. In order to reach the large masses in rural India, telemedicine has been proposed. However, virtual platform may be encouraged to provide continuous medical education and teach newer advances to primary health workers. But to treat the large rural masses, seems to be an over-ambitious proposal even in the near future. Lastly, I would like to quote William Osler. In medical profession, the medical profession will be forever poorer for failing to see, feel, and examine. And adding in my own words, in the past, now, and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, both the speakers, for an excellent debate and rebuttal, a very balanced opinion, and coming directly straight from the heart. Aditya, can I request you to open the poll? Wow, we are getting a very balanced opinion here, and that is because of the excellent debating capabilities of both the debaters. Still, the result goes in favor of a way forward. Video consultation is way forward by 54% of people and 206 votes, and recipe for disaster for 46% votes with 179 people. I think it's a very balanced opinion, and still the way forward wins the debate. Thank you, both the speakers. We move on to the last debate of the today, and we always say the best for the last because that is the only way we can anchor the audience. We have today two astute debaters, and to me, both the debaters are such that they could have argued out on each scenario separately, against or for. Both of them could have still debated whether they believed it or not. And to give an analogy, both of them can sell a glass of water to a drowning man. So we have these excellent debaters who would be fun to watch. One is Director of Academics and Department of Nephrology, Dr. Rushi Deshpande, and another is a consultant from the Urology Department, Dr. Ajit Vaze, who also doesn't require introduction, and he is known for his witty comments. So we look forward to hear both of them on whether our children should take up medicine, next gen should take up medicine or not. Rushi starts first and then followed by Ajit Vaze.
So this is a Founders Day program, and a happy Founders Day again to all of us. A big thanks to the Jaslok family, the Jaslok trustees, the management, the conveners of this program, and all my colleagues at Jaslok for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this program. So the topic given to me today was something interesting. Should Generation Next get into medicine? And I'm asked to speak in favor of this motion. So it's always easy when you are asked to speak in something you believe in. Yeah. So, after the COVID pandemic, the only profession that has proven its worth is the medical profession. So in today's day and time, I wonder whether there's a need for this debate at all. But, just to be fair to my opponent, Dr. Vaze sir, we call him sir, he's very senior to us. So let me predate this debate to the pre-COVID era. Pre-COVID, this was the scenario in the newspapers. Jokingly, patients telling the doctor, don't worry, nothing will happen to you, instead of the doctor telling the patient, reassuring the patient. Or in schools, people coming in with cartoons, kids saying, oh, it's too long a career, it's too difficult. I don't want to become anything, I'll become but a doctor. And the media carrying hashtags in press, stop violence against doctors, save the savior. Long considered a noble profession, it has lost respect in the public eye. A dream job for many, it is perceived as a job best avoided. So anything but a doctor was becoming a sentiment. So the question is, are we really disgruntled? And a lot of doctors would not want to become again a doctor. So we thought, why not ask our own whether this is a true thing? So we conducted a survey in our own institute at Jaslok. We got 170 responses, 140 from our consultants and 30 from our residents. And this was the response. 70% of our consultants would become a doctor again if they had to live their life all over again. Only 30% chose to choose for some other career. And when said why, this is why they would become a doctor all over again. 84% say that it's the most gratifying profession despite all the challenges, and only 4% of them are there because it is also well paying once you get settled. 7% think of it as a calling, and they believe that they are in it here for some spiritual reasons. The people who think that if maybe they don't want to get into it again, the main things are unhappy with the current image, long learning curve, and work-life balance are the three major issues. Residents, they are going through a difficult phase of their lives. Still 60% want to become a doctor again. Why? Most gratifying profession, and again, a calling. The people who said no, long learning curve, unhappy with the current image, no work-life balance, these are the main things. I would like to tell them it only gets better in the long run. The altered perception is a media hype. Most of us become a doctor because of an inner calling. If that was not true, you would not have been brave, not gone in to see those COVID patients. Look at what's the real picture. Look at the number of kids who want to become a doctor every year. Why do you become a doctor? Look at the number of career opportunities. There are 60 branches after becoming an MBBS. You use acquired skills and empathy to alleviate pain and suffering. Tell me one other branch that does that. You are in high demand all over the world. There's job safety, high salary. You find cures. You have developed medicines through research. This is why you choose a career. Salary, job satisfaction, job security, work-life balance. Any of your counselors will tell you that. But there's something more that makes it all worth it. And that's only in medicine. Remember, despite the long road, at the end of it, it's the most gratifying profession. I know it's a long road. It's not very easy in other branches. Remember that. There is no retirement and the income keeps growing. So don't worry about the income. It's a recession-proof branch. When all other branches have been hit, healthcare continues to grow, even in income. The minor disadvantage in the longer time required to settle is suppressed by the better job opportunities, the recession-proof nature of the job, and the growth involved. Work-life balance, yes, it is an issue like most of you pointed out. But remember this, that etiology could be the unrealistic expectations that some of us are now developing. And all of us need to balance our own personal and professional life to achieve the work-life balance. There's some of us are developing it, right? In other countries, group practices are the norm. For residents, European Union, USA, a lot of other countries have developed working hours, 40 hours a week, 48 hours a week. Absolutely strict rules not to allow extra work so that they can also have some work-life balance. I'm sure it will come here very soon. Violence against doctors, yes, we are all strictly against it. We are actually in the, like this cartoon shows, we are in the crosshairs. It's not, the anger is misdirected. This is a defense budget and that is the healthcare budget. We are not responsible. Violence is a societal evil. It's part of a bigger picture. It reflects the degradation of the society as a whole. It's not only against doctors. It's against all professionals. It's against all white-collared professions, people who can't strike back. What are the steps being taken? I think younger doctors are being taught communication skills, stern laws are being drafted, awareness is being cultivated. We all need to stand up against it. Stress is high in our profession, agreed, but then where is it not in the current day and time? All across the corporate world, anybody who wants to be an high achiever has to face it. Everywhere it is. Look at this. Suicide rates, engineering profession, management, everywhere. Stress rates are high. We need to be practical. This is what other professions have, which we don't have. Most of the graduates from other professions are unemployable. They don't practice what they learn. Has that ever been the case with a doctor? Look at the management graduates, engineering graduates, what they are trained for and what they practice when they come out. Look at doctors. You do exactly what you train for. Remember that always. Changing image of the profession in the society. The change is inevitable. Remember this. We are part of an evolving capitalist culture. We cannot expect the respect that was once given to our peers in the past. The benefit of serving ourselves and getting to serve others at the same time while earning respect, gratitude, and decent remuneration makes medical profession one of the best respected professions in the current era. Never stop. One day you will be somebody's hope, someone's hero. And one day people will thank you that you did not give up now. I believe personally that the generation next should aspire to become a doctor. It is a calling. It is for those of you who believe that life should have a higher purpose. And for those of you who believe that we just don't live here to die with an epitaph of how much money you collected at the end of your life. Thank you.
Now I invite Dr. Ajit Waze to give his presentation.
Thank you very much, Paresh. Srinivas, management of Jaslok Hospital, and my friend Rushi Deshpande. Let me share my screen and we'll start the ball rolling. So Rushi tried his level best to give rise to that, but there are some problems in this generation. Number one, it was said for a long time that we follow the seniors, we follow the father figure, and you will probably have a very safe bet to go back. But in today's scenario, if you advise a patient or a person who please take medicine as a career, it is going to be disastrous, despicable, and dangerous. There are multiple reasons which even Rushi knows about it, and he is completely aware of that. He's a very intelligent person. And I'm just giving you remuneration, and one after the other. The reason continues in second page also. So let us start some of the important part together. We all became doctors, and first, as a first class person in interscience, used to walk in. The first 160 went to KM Hospital and so on. But today the whole situation is completely different. It is like a tsunami hitting the whole family. The entire people, whole of family and the person is continuously studying for NEET examination almost 16 to 18 hours a day. For a municipal hospital, it has separate list. For a private hospital, it has separate list. Ultimately leads to commotion, difficulty, and ultimately very little knowledge where exactly the person is going. And then somehow, somewhere, you occupy that 8,900 seat, one seat for yourself. But if you think that the problem is over, wait. The next is the new examination which is coming, which is getting a bigger problem. The education, less said, I talk about it better because we had a dedicated teachers who used to teach us. Even though all of us were first 160 from the university, few people did lag behind, but they were given education. Now what has happened? The entire curriculum has changed, especially for surgical branches, where the anatomy was very important, has been reduced from 1.5 years to 1 year, and so on and so forth. So after completing the part, there is a second NEET examination for undergraduate degree and compulsory internship. And therefore, the doctors has to go for uphill task of securing postgraduate, which is more ordeal than what it is required. So most of the people whom I talk nowadays are not willing to invest their time, almost 10 to 15 years, learning medicine, trying to get a desired life, but unfortunately come back with a completely different picture. And therefore, the shorter time and easier professions are equally available. We all have to do extensive training, be it undergraduate, be it postgraduate, or be it even super specialty. We have seen several students of ours after getting MCH urology, they are not knowing the fundamentals of urology together. Let's look at the top 100 medical school. Johns Hopkins, number 1. But where is Maharashtra? Where is Mumbai? Where is the West Zone in this part together? And this is a survey which has come in 2021. Reservation is a huge problem, right, for last 15 years time. It varies according to the state. There are several unknown religious reserve quotas, and the person who is a mediocre friend of yours suddenly taps your back and says, I am already entrained. What kind of certificate, what kind of proof, what kind of creamy layer, and what kind of Indian mentality, what is known as jugaad, which comes in existence, God only knows, and they also know. 205 rupees for 6 months, all of us have done it, and I'm sure Srinivas will vouch for it. But look at what is happening today, 70,000 per year in municipal hospital, private as per your need, and the ranges can go up to level. You have to understand that the parents who are supporting you has their income in middle class and lower middle class or even higher middle class in India has gone proportionately high. There are several mental factors, physical, mental, emotional. And last 15 years, there is a burnout syndrome, which is giving rise to exhaustion, depersonalization, and leading to less effectivity and efficacy in the work together. And these are all depicted here. It doesn't happen in undergraduate, it happens in postgraduate, and even in a super specialty. Bonds, we never knew what is bond, but today it is reality. 10 lakh, 50 lakh in certain state. In MCH urology, it goes up to 5 crores. And therefore Hindu, one of the most prestigious newspaper in South India, had to tell the idea of compelling the people to serve the state hospital is neither just nor appealing. The doctors are, as a result, are completely torn between the suicidal part in both, especially women, are increasing leaps and bounds. There are social factors, less hours at home, struggle to maintain marital life, and it is also very important to know that if you are doing MCH urology in Punjab, your would-be or your wife will be doing something in gynecology in state of Kerala. So how does the love come? Does it come out of telephonic conversation or by postal delay? Therefore, the divorce rate in physician is almost 1/4 as compared to part together. The physical factor is equally important. In the hospital, there are infectious disease, flu, and you have to understand in last 1.5 years, more than 1,400 doctors have lost their life to treat the COVID. What was the award? Ironically, Arvind Kejriwal gave that we should nominate all these people for Bharat Ratna. Is he trying to fool whom? Radiation. There are problems in radiation.
Sir, you have 1 minute left in your time.
Yes. And the needle stick injury. The financial is probably the most important. The PP index as compared to the Western world is absolutely poor. If you see, compare the patient with the plumber's one, by 40, they are equal. But after that, plumber takes over. I don't want to go to the Silicon Valley because it is mind-boggling. The CEO of mid-size gets 11.5 crore rupees. Which doctor gets it? As a result, growing dissatisfaction all over the world. Many people are losing that, and I have got more than 270 people who have just written to me directly telling them that we will never make our next generation as doctor. The post-degree ordeal doesn't end there. Once you want to come passed out, in order to set up your own set, it costs a fortune. And thereafter, consumers protection and other things are huge. Violence is important. Thank you, Rishi, for giving this place, but 75% doctors are at violence. You have to understand where does it come from the
time is up.
people.
You might have to conclude, sir. Your time is up.
Thank you. So just to tell you in nutshell, the violence is growing. Is that the only way we can support ourselves or protect ourselves? The medias, the part together, and our own prime minister do not have. And lastly, retirement age. Where doctors have a retirement age? So Rishi, if you want to decide between retirement and old age, let me give you a small cartoon. It is where the ice goes in, whether it goes in the nice cup, chota or bada, or goes on your ailing.
Sir, given the time restrictions, we're sorry, but we had to put your session to an end.
Thank you, Aditya, and thank you, Dr. Vazay. You can cover up the lost ground in your rebuttal. You still have a 3 minute of rebuttal. So we give Rishi Deshpande to rebut what Dr. Vazay has put forth.
Thank you, Dr. Vazay, sir. You actually made my job a lot easier. I mean, you went on record to say that getting into medicine is very difficult. I would question you, what does that tell you? Is it something that a lot of people aspire to do, or is it something that a lot of people don't want to do, that is difficult to get into? I request you to ask yourself. Also, it's a bit shocking that the president of the USI, Indian body of urologists, the president of that is on record exhorting young kids not to become doctors. It looks a bit like that to me. Thali mein ched. Doesn't sound good, right? I mean, doctors, they're earning as much as anybody else. Look at the median, don't look at the extremes. A top urologist like you also earns in crores. So what if a mid-level CEO earns in crores, sir? I mean, a retirement is a matter of personal choice. Who stops anybody from retiring in medicine? All of us can retire when we want to. Sacrifice, doctors putting themselves in the line of harm to serve others and dying, that is as big as a soldier who dies in the line of fire trying to protect his motherland. It is something to be respected and honored. Nobody needs to be, nobody can put a price on that, sir. Nobody can give you a trophy for that. It's just something you should be proud of. I mean, I really feel that we should not belittle our brethren who have done this in this time and put medical above any other profession in the world. I again say the same thing. The benefits of serving ourselves and getting to serve others at the same time while earning the respect, gratitude, and decent remuneration makes medical profession one of the best respected professions in the current era. And after more than 60 years of being in the medical profession, while accepting the
1 minute left in your
Ratna Award, Dr. Ashwin Mehta, he said, and I'm sure you remember this, he said that if given a chance to be born again, he would still wish to be a cardiologist again and not a Mittal or a Birla. I hope that drives home all the confusions that have ever been there about the next generation being a doctor. Thank you so much.
And nice, Rushi. And we asked Dr. Ajit Waze to give his rebuttal now.
So let me start with certain things that Rushi has been very nicely and cleverly done a survey of Jaslok Hospital. I went to several statisticians and they said there was a conflict of interest. The sample size was very small and it was not blinded and hence cannot be taken as a gospel truth. As far as Dr. Ashwin Mehta is concerned, he is our teacher. We respect him a lot. But one single opinion is anecdotal or incidental and should not be the rule of the game. If you see the science, we have been having a mockery of this science for several years together. And look at the way in which the circumstances, situations are happening all over India. For me to come from my house to this thing, previously the tank was full. Today, probably after a few months or few years, I'll have to buy petrol in sachets. If you do a good job, you will have, your names will not come on the first or second page as a doctor, but a small side supplement which nobody reads. By 89, other people are getting one more extension. Rushi, with your all cleverness, tell me one incident where after 70, any doctor has got a extension or part. So please remember, get your life back, just not by destroying the cell phones, which is all over the world, but also tell the juniors, your people, that you should not follow. There are several other professions which are giving you peace of mind. You really need to be sick to take medicine. And remember, this is a very essential part. Let me draw a nice, small, happy family tree for Rushi Deshpande. It is flourishing. It is, and we are all very proud and happy about that. And obviously, the head of the family tree.
So you have 1 minute left in this session.
Yes, I'm going to finish in less than 30 seconds. But this tree will not blossom. It will go down to the downhill if you continue with the same proposal that the next generation to take medicine, because it will not give rise to a huge amount of dissident in younger doctors. But if you do the same thing for your own progeny, your son, he will be absolutely against this. Lastly, but not the least, all of us have seen a beautiful movie called Bridge on the River Kwai. And there is a very invigorating doctor like you in that. Colonel Nicholson gives you a nice advice that you are a very good doctor, Rushi, but you have a lot of things to learn from life. Thank you.
Thank you, both the speakers, and excellent debate. As I told you, that both of them can argue on each side and come out winners. Let us see now what the audience feels about that. Can we have the poll, Aditya, please?
51% versus 50%. Bravo.
So both of are winners. Yeah. Both are winners.
Both of them. And if we had given the, I agree fully with you, if I had given the same topics, ulta topics to them, they would have done the great job. Okay.
Exactly.
Can I now request our medical director, Dr. Milind Khadke, to give the vote of thanks?
Thank you, Dr. Desai. Good afternoon, my dear doctor colleagues. Pardon my sore voice. Probably it's a result of excess consumption of ice cream or ice. I don't know. But it's an honor for me to have been asked to deliver the vote of thanks here for this CME program, which is very special because it is on the occasion of the Foundation Day of Jaslok Hospital and Research Center. It is indeed an outstanding event, as Jaslok is now 48 years old and is becoming further wiser in terms of its knowledge base, skill sets, and manpower capabilities to deliver world-class holistic healthcare to its patients. We have been fortunate to have the best doctors amongst the doctors and the infrastructure in this part of the country. I wish to offer my sincere gratitude to the chairperson, Dr. Mrs. Kanta Madam, our board of trustees and CEO for their continual support in raising the bar for the standard of care being delivered to our patients, as well as supporting us in all our academic activities. I wish to offer my sincere gratitude to Chairperson Kanta Madam, our board of trustees and CEO for their continual support in raising the bar for the standard of care being delivered to our patients, as well as supporting us in all our academic endeavors. A very hearty thanks to the speakers for sharing their valuable opinions on the interesting topics for today. Dr. Katrak enlightened us very well about in his keynote address on the topic of origin of HIV. Thank you, Dr. Katrak, and the chairpersons of the keynote address, Dr. Pandya and Dr. Desai. The debates have been thought-provoking to one and all, and the choice of topics made it interesting for all of us. Again, Dr. Desai and Dr. Paresh Doshi, thank you for that. And I take this occurrence to thank all the participants of the debates for representing their valuable views. I must remark a proficient sense of gratefulness to our conveners, Dr. Srinivas Desai and Dr. Paresh Doshi. And the organizers of the CME, our marketing team also has done a very good job in getting this CME together. I wish to extend my generous thanks to all our guests participating in the CME. For the first time, I have seen a CME being attended by more than 1,000 participants. I mean, this is a record number of participants. And active involvement from the audience like you motivates us to keep going with such novel academic activities, even in the future. In the end, I would request you all to stay safe. COVID is still around. Thank you all for your patient hearing. Back to Dr. Desai.
Thank you, Dr. Milind. So thank you for your kind words and constant support. On behalf of me and Paresh, I take this opportunity to profusely thank so many whose contribution was mandatory for success of this CME. I need to thank Dr. Milind, Medical Director, who did not thank himself, and he thanked everybody else. So thank you, Dr. Milind, for being there. But I need to thank my co-convener, Paresh Doshi, for bringing in new ideas and enthusiasm. So we form a new team and take it to the better heights further. Thanks, Paresh. Thank you very much. Of course, we need to thank Board of Trustees, CEO, and Jaslok Management for a constant constructive support all the time. Super sincere thanks to marketing team of Jaslok, headed by George, very enthusiastic person, with a special mention of Mr. Ashutosh. He is just unbelievable. Every conference, he comes out with more flying colors. Last time when we did our MRI update, we crossed 1800, and that time we were saying we had done one of the best conferences in CME. Today, we have crossed 2800 registrations. It's unbelievable. And Ashutosh always takes it as a challenge. So Ashutosh, thank you so much from me and Paresh for this.
Exactly.
Of course, we need to thank entire faculty for doing a great job, and the participants, without whom this can't be a success at all. Not last but not the least, very, very, very sincere thanks to Caravan, Aditya, and Swati for very professional conduct and doing this audiovisual and the computer work so professionally. Now we have become a team and will continue to do that. Aditya, Swati, thank you so much. Paresh, if you want to say something.
No, thanks. I would just like to thank you, Srinivas, for having me on board and giving me this opportunity to be a part of this prestigious CME that we have been conducting for last, I would say, 20 years or plus since I have been there. So, and all credit goes to you because of your hard efforts that you have been keeping up the standard and uplifting the standard every time. I think we have thank all of us, everybody, and once again wish everybody a happy Sunday and a good afternoon.